Hey,
What is up, New York? Not New York. Up, Sebastopol. Woo woo.
Let's go.
Let's go.
I don't
That
see it.
thumbnail looks beautiful. I just want you to know that.
Yeah.
Yup, chapter 24 with Yasha. Oh yes.
Oh
There it
yeah.
is.
We got Yasha.
All right, you guys. I'm gonna be the very first comment on the live stream. Y'all ready for this?
Can you publish the link on Instagram and stuff?
Yeah, we should
No,
do
Yasha, you stole that from me. Yasha, you.
it. Yeah, Yasha. I'm gonna beat Daniel. Yeah.
No.
Uh,
No. Just, okay, can we delete Yasha's comment quickly? 1 second.
moderator powers activate.
Actually, I have like DJ2N logged in also, so I can technically do that.
Yes, you could.
No, I'm not. You know what, Yasha? I cede my victory to you today.
Alright, yeah, let me grab the link for y'all.
Let's throw it up on the Instas.
Throw it up on the Instas.
Throw it up on the Instas.
Let's go. Okay, I got copy.
Let's
Does
go. We got
Does
3 people
Synergy do
watching
cross
right
clipboard
now.
copy?
Woo!
It does! Synergy
What's
is so
up,
cool!
boys?
Okay, there's the link. For I push with the boys. Yasha, you better not be playing heavy metal for the whole damn stream.
I don't even. I have,
This is not heavy metal, Nick.
What? I can barely hear it.
This
It
is
sounds like
not
metal
heavy
from a
metal.
distance.
Oh my gosh, that's heavy metal. Okay, I have Arthur.
It's definitely metal. Anyway,
Arthur is muted. Okay, here I'll put it on DJ2N right now, and then I probably like post it on my like actual account also.
yeah, I'm gonna post a story on my account.
You got me.
APUSH what do you say? Nick, that's the absolute worst translation ever. I want you to.
What does that? What does that
What
mean?
is what are you trying to say? Because that literally means APUSH with the boys, the live revolution.
Viva la revolution.
Viva la revolution!
Yeah.
Yes, Viva la revolution! This isn't even revolution. This is World War II. Woo, let's go.
Oh,
World War
whatever. Close enough.
Close enough.
I should set up my dock.
You should do that. It's chillin' though, cause we have to wait a hot
Alright.
second while I.
Boo.
Hey, do you guys want to talk about AP Lang for a moment?
Sure thing. We're just chilling until Josh gets here, anyways.
I love
Is
AP
Miss
Lang.
Maxon, like... Miss Maxon, does she understand what she's doing to us?
No.
I don't think Miss Maxon knows at all what's going on.
I think. Yeah, I think so. Well, I guess we don't communicate.
I mean, we communicate.
I've lost so much sleep.
Nick, you don't get to
She
tell
has-
us what sleep. Nick, look at me. Nick, there
Daniel,
are 7 astral beings. 7, not 1, not 2. There's
Yeah,
7 astral beings above my bed.
Daniel, I understand why you fall over all the time. Losing like 12 hours of sleep, my balance has just become absolutely awful.
Hey, how
Hey,
do you
my
do this
balance
split
is really
screen on
good.
the
That's
last-
me. I have the best balance. Also, astral beings floating above your bed in the middle of the night is a very terrifying thing. So I would not recommend.
Vaping. I've never heard the translation vaping.
Wait, what is the link?
They
Oh,
say
it's
the
there.
broken Chinese army give a
W.
vaping. Vaping. No, technically.
Four.
No.
Dude, I should get a bit.ly esque thing, and then I could be like, APUSH.boys.
How's my mic sounding?
Well,
'Cause I can
somebody
So
has it going over the
J
speakers,
means
and I can
capital.
tell.
And so it's like North Capital, South Capital, and like East Capital.
see North capital, South capital, East capital.
Yeah.
Let's listen to some authentic,
Yes, Katyusha. Okay, I'm gonna unmute Arthur for this one. That's not Katyusha. Where's Katyusha?
Like the rocket launcher.
DJ2 and the
Way
boys.
better than
Oh, nice.
We have 5 people watching right now. Hey, y'all, if you're in, like, leave a comment so we know who's watching right now. Say hi to the boys.
Yeah,
We
come
got
say
guest star
hi.
Yasha today. Say hi.
Hello.
Wow, we've
We're
got
currently waiting for the final
Nick
vote.
Leet and Yasha and
hey folks.
Hi.
The boys have congregated.
they sure have.
The
Oh, I haven't
boys
even
of
finished
Hungary.
up setting the stream up. Whoops.
Yeah, like, set up, like, get the notes up and stuff, because they're still, like, getting ready.
Let's see, chapter 24.
Do I get to see the notes?
You sure do.
You sure do. Also, just, like, open up the, like, website on your computer.
I have Yelp.
Yeah, that's all you need.
Are you gonna share the notes with me?
You can
Oh my
look on
gosh,
the
you
stream.
guys, you guys ready for this? I'm gonna sing for you guys. I know this song word for word.
Alright, Danny. Let's hear it.
Расцветали яблони и груши, расплыли туманы над рекой. Ой. Выходила на берег Катюша, на высокий, на берег крутой. Wait, I'm so off. Выходила на берег Катюша,
You're doing great
на
there.
высокий берег на крутой. Выходила, песню заводила. Wait, shoot. Yasha just laughed. No.
He can't come
Is my
back.
singing that bad?
Yasha, every
No.
time you leave, I have to bring you back. So like,
No, your singing is beautiful, Danny.
Yasha, you just made me self-conscious about my singing.
No, no.
How do you know this?
It was an accident.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Fine, you don't get to listen to me singing anymore just because of that.
I meant
I
to
hope-
use myself.
Do you guys think Miss Ambrose put the key terms in order of appearance this time?
Выходила, песню
Probably.
заводила.
Yeah,
Про высокое видового творца. Wait, no. Estrella, this is Russian art. This is my culture.
hey, it's Estrella.
Actually, Estrella, that's you-are, not your. That's the wrong spelling of you-are.
Wow.
Absolutely bamboozled. What can I
Destroyed.
say?
Actually, the spelling is fine, but the usage
Thank
is
you,
incorrect.
Estrella. Your singing is beautiful also.
The first year was wrong, the second year was correct.
You guys, today we're going to talk about Nazis.
Yay.
We sure are. You got me
Don't
there.
forget the Japanese.
Look, there are key terms for you. How happy.
Oh yeah, it's mainly with the Japanese though.
What notes should I do? Should I do like your notes or my
Because the
notes?
world is because the world history is just about the United States. We're in the center.
Honestly, this is such a bopper. It's such a good song. На высокий берег на крутой.
It's so quiet.
Выходила на берег Катюша. На высокий берег на
Japanese
крутой.
Empire. What the hell is the Japanese Empire? Wow, what a mystery.
Is
Hey, Josh. That's everyone.
DJ21 has assembled. Let's go.
Actually, I think, dude, we're only live for 7 minutes. We should like wait a little sec.
Yeah, let's wait till like we're like at 15 minutes. All right, y'all. How has your day been? Let's just recap with the boys.
Oh yeah, hold on. Have we promoted our stream on Instagram yet?
Not enough. We need more promotion. You guys, promote this on your story. We're doing like, we're going out. We're going all out. I'm choking on pineapple as I'm speaking, but it's worth it because pineapple's tasty.
You're
Whoa, you guys,
dude,
what
you're
if
eating
somebody?
pineapple? That's sick.
I am. What if somebody made pineapple ice cream? That'd be so cool.
That would be legit, bro. Wait,
Have you
actually,
heard
would
of
it be?
Dole
I
Whip
don't know.
Before?
I guess like
Didn't we?
Daniel, we had a Dole Whip together in
in
Hawaii.
Hawaii. Never mind.
It was delicious.
It was delicious.
Pineapple ice cream. Best.
Let's just go back to Hawaii right now. Like, what's the point of being here?
I would so rather be in
You know what?
Hawaii.
We could
right
just
now.
sit in Hawaii and eat Dole Whips instead of learning about World War II.
I want
It
to
was
forget
actually-
about my synthesis
Hawaii is very
paper.
appropriate for the chapter today.
Yes, it
Actually,
is.
You have a
actually it
point.
is. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. It sure was.
A day that shall live in infamy.
According to Franklin Delano Dylan Pepper, whatever his
Hell
name.
no, Roosevelt.
Franklin Dillon Pepper Roosevelt.
Franklin Dylan Pepper Roosevelt. Oh, we still have like the catchphrase that Roosevelt was the G from last stream.
Yeah, we gotta make a new one this time.
World War II was not fun.
That works, yeah.
Yeah,
But
this
it was good because it got out of the Great Depression.
Josh, didn't we
Oh.
have this exact same thing happening at break? Like between you and Nick?
That was a bad.
Well, it was really good for us.
It was not good for the Soviet Union.
How do we point people towards the stream? Like,
You can send them the link,
It was
or
not
you
good
can
for the
say
You can just like
link in
shout-
bio.
well,
I don't know.
Yeah, we just well, Astray just sent it to the link chat, and then you can just like we can just put it on our story. So like either shout out DJ21 on your story, like just, or whatever.
I really love that Estrella is just, you know, advocating for us this much. Here you go,
You know,
Estrella.
Estrella is one of the honorary boys.
That's right.
Also, we have 7 people watching, so that means that there's at least one other person that's like not us watching.
That's pretty good.
That's not Astray. So there's 2 people watching. Wow.
I know, right?
We're going. Actually, there's more than 2 people watching. There's 1, 2, 3. No, there's 2 people watching. Never mind.
One of them is me. Yeah.
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 So that's
And
two
Nick, are
people.
you watching?
okay, It's on my story. Yeah, I am.
Okay.
So it's us 5, then +2.
Alright, I sent the link to the Lang chat too, just because that's important.
So who's reading first?
I don't know.
Okay, so how's this gonna work? Because I don't take notes, so I usually read. So with guests, are they gonna like? Am I just gonna like answer questions in live while they're reading, or like what do I do?
You guys can take turns or something.
I'll just sit and look pretty. But yeah, we can switch off reading also.
Did I misspell the link? Are you kidding me?
Did you actually misspell the link? That's
Brooke's
great.
like, link not working, and I'm like, no!
Wait, how do you know link's not working?
Because she said it's not working.
Oh, did she DM you?
Yes.
Oh.
You're
If
very
the video is unavailable, Nick, the link doesn't work.
That is
Fix the
quite
link,
problematic.
Daniel.
The link's not working.
Well, that's no fun. Video unavailable.
I'm gonna leave and go scream into a pit for a minute and be right back.
That's fine. We'll figure out how to copy links and stuff over
Did you
here.
say screaming to a pit, Daniel?
Yeah, that's what Estrella's doing.
Exactly, that's what Shreya said.
Oh,
Oh, okay, yeah.
it's all excused now.
It's all excuse now. You know what? I think I should just like start like reading out.
Do I just not know how to spell? What's going on
Spelling
here?
is-
W-U, which are both capital, u2.b/WU.
No!
Oh my goodness, this is so
No! Stop!
horrid.
Silenced. We're not spamming stuff. This is APUSH with the boys, not communism.
Oh, I'm gonna have a really good Japan fun fact when we get to like the end of the war.
Well, right now's the best time to do it because we're still waiting for people to join in.
I'm
we wait the
so
first 15 minutes.
confused.
But they're not fun. So I'll give it to the boys, and we'll see if you
Fun
guys like
facts
it.
with Yasha.
Oh,
That
is-
could be a podcast right there.
So
Is
the
the
fun
stream
fact
not
is that at the
unlisted
end
or
of the
something?
war,
I'm so confused.
when rockets,
Why are you having issues
and-
with the streaming thing?
I don't know.
aircraft and jet aircraft were coming into vogue, and so all the other countries were using like these really cool rocket aircraft. The Jap, wow, rocket airplane, that's really cool. We're gonna strap a person into it, and it's gonna be a kamikaze plane. And they basically made the first guided missile, the first anti-ship missile. Yeah.
Wow.
Although Germans made missiles too, but Japan, they said rockets. You know, that was the,
That's the way.
the kamikaze out of it.
Human missiles.
Alright,
Yes.
time to just like paste the link in chat.
They went
I
so
guess.
fast you couldn't shoot them down.
Well, that's pretty neato.
Wait, that's the exact link
Daniel
I
is
pasted earlier.
not
Kill
neat.
me.
It's definitely not neat.
It's definitely not Neato, Daniel.
Well, I mean, it's like it's history.
Kamikaze is not Neato. That should be our.
Okay, that's the new catchphrase. Kamikaze is not neato.
Josh, are you still here?
Alright, we got 9 people watching, so we got. Oh, never mind. As soon as I said that,
I'm
we
here.
Oh,
I'm here, but I'm eating still, so hold on.
So there's
Oh, you're
5
chilling.
of us. Wait, who else is watching? They haven't announced themselves.
Yeah.
There's like 9 or 8 people watching. I don't know.
How do I see who's watching?
I say once we hit 15 minutes, we just start, and then the people can just tune in.
Oh, participants.
Okay. Now, I'm 1 second. I'm reposting stuff on my story because apparently I can't send links properly.
My tongue is slowly dying from the pineapple, and I don't like this.
you guys, everyone set up your notes. Get ready to follow along.
I'm not ready. I have to eat still. Hold on. Give me a break.
I was talking to our glorious audience here
Oh.
Oh.
of like 3 people.
You know what? This audience, we may be, we're doing good. Don't even worry about it.
Can I see the terms? Can you bring up the terms again, Brent?
It's on the. Oh, you're not in the classroom. Okay.
Why don't we just send the link?
Wait, Yasha, why aren't you in APUSH?
Yeah. Wait. Why aren't you in
I've asked that
APUSH?
multiple times now, and we never get the answer to it.
No, I did. The answer is that I thought it would be too much, and it would not have been too much.
That's
Definitely
what,
not.
Yeah, that's what happened with me with AP World.
AP World is a lot harder than APUSH.
And then Nick and I just skipped to the finals in our other history
I would have
class,
had
so it's fine.
5 grade bumped classes, and I thought that would have been too much, but it wouldn't have been too much.
Shit.
Yasha, I put them in the.
Thank you. Yeah, I see that.
Okay, I sent the
Um,
link properly this
What
time.
would to be called the Good War? How did American participation impact the lives of minorities and women? Well, that's a little bit weird. How did World War II transform America's place in the world? Now that the third question is the big question, And understanding World War II means you understand the current geopolitical situation of the world and why America is as powerful as it is.
It sure does appear to be that way.
The Second World War is one of the big parts of it. Yeah.
We've
You know
got
that
9
Mickey
viewers. That's
I'm,
pretty
I'm,
big.
I'm not gonna tell my Mickey Mouse.
Look, themes: World War II, mobilization, military. Boom.
Alright, guys, we're almost at the 15-minute mark. We're at 14 minutes ago.
We are at 15 minutes now, yeah.
We're not going right at 15 because I have to do something.
Oh my goodness,
That's
Josh. How long is it gonna
Josh,
take
what
you?
is that?
That is... I don't even... Is that a plane that hit a wall?
Is that the Kamikaze? Wait.
Yep, uh-huh.
Damn.
Oh, fun.
Harsh. Nobody can see what I'm talking about. Okay.
You guys, I gotta go.
No,
put
they
the
say
ducks
you're
in.
either harsh or you're not harsh.
What's
Oh, this
really
one's
cool
better.
because
Hold
you
on.
could explode the fuel or munitions,
guys
especially with like an aircraft carrier. You could explode like the plane fuel.
Do you guys want to listen to the ducks?
But-
Do you want to have a chat with the ducks?
Alright, you guys, we're just listening to some ducks while
Alright,
we're waiting
hold up.
for
Let me
Josh to
grab
set
a
up,
duck.
and then we're gonna go.
Oh, yes. Very good.
This is like live, high-quality ducks from Nick Leet's house, so enjoy it while you can.
Well, I swear, we're starting soon.
Yeah, we are. Please, like, don't leave. We're just like, hey, are you just showing off the Kamikaze plane picture now?
No, it's just showing the yop right now. Although I would like Nick to share his notes with me so I can put those on a separate thing.
Nick's busy being Duckman.
Busy being Duckman.
Alright, I'm gonna go get some water because my mouth is actually about to die from this pineapple. Amatil is here! What is up, Amatil? Hello!
What's up, Amatil?
Actually, I'm just gonna get a whole water bottle full of water because you know what they say.
Love and
Hydration keeps the hydration away.
Nice, Daniel.
You know what they say, hydration keeps you hydrated.
Alright, everyone.
Hydration does keep you hydrated.
Here's duck.
Yay! He's so
This
good.
is Bossy.
I
Very
I love it.
I'm gonna go put her back outside.
Okay.
What's the date today?
It's the 3rd.
3 March?
3/3/20. The 3rd period.
Okay.
Okay.
Almost there.
Thank.
I don't even have the yop open yet.
It's alright, we'll get there someday.
Just listen. Or watch the stream, that works too.
Yeah. Okay.
What chapter is this? 24? Yeah.
Yeah. Alright, I'm gonna put my notes there. Wait, why doesn't OBS let you crop things? Oh wait, I know what I can do. Actually, that's still horrid though. OBS is like the worst streaming manager I could possibly get. I will.
You want? I can use the one I have if you want. Plus,
It's
I have 3 monitors, which is
fine.
helpful.
Oh, I have 3 monitors.
Alright, guys,
It's
I
true.
am back with water.
I have
Welcome
3
back.
monitors and a laptop.
Damn it.
One up.
What's buy mean? A buy and buy? What? Y'all should let me be buy. I can't read.
You should let me be a bi. I did radio ads in my childhood. What is a bi, Estrella?
Estrella, what's a buy? There's 10 people watching now. Let's go. APUSH with the boys.
10 whole people? Oh my goodness.
APUSH with the boys.
There's 10 and half of it is our
Shut up, Yasha.
Nobody needs to know
Yasha,
that.
no one wanted to know that.
No,
We started 18 minutes ago.
that's false.
Yeah, we're at 18:35.
Hold on, I'm making my notes.
Oh my goodness. Wait, Nick, can you share your notes with me?
We gotta keep them entertained.
Yeah.
Okay,
You guys
fine,
wanna
go.
hear
I'll
some
just make my
fun
notes
Russian
while you guys go.
songs.
Oh, we're starting?
You can start, it's fine. I'll just make notes.
Do you want to have my notes?
Oh, we should let you
I
be a
shared my
boy,
notes,
Estrella.
so you
Yes,
can
we
see
will.
the
We will
creation
let
of
you
my
be a boy.
Nick,
Alright.
put it into storage, not into general.
Australia, I think that's
Well,
kind
no,
of
it doesn't
like a
matter,
personal
'cause
journey.
the-
You'll have to do your stuff.
It's different notes every week. Wee.
Okay, estoy listo.
That's my yell.
Let's go.
¿Cómo
Folks.
estás listo? Oh, está muy bueno, Nick. Yo estoy muy happy.
Feliz.
They were talking about the Japanese false flag attack in Manchuria.
Alright,
Sure
oh yeah, I am
was.
gonna move those
False-
notes to a different channel.
Alright,
Alright,
ready?
we're
Ready?
ready.
Start.
Yeah, let's go.
The boys. Alright.
Let us
Yasha
begin.
Brooke, as our first official guest, I dub thee the honor of reading the introduction.
Okay. 1. Introduction.
Don't you
The
dare say one.
1930s, 1940s were trying times. A global economic crisis gave way to a global war that became the deadliest and most destructive in human history. Perhaps 80 million individuals lost their lives during World War II. The war saw industrialized genocide and nearly threatened the eradication of an entire people. It also unleashed the most fearsome technology ever used in war. And when it ended, the United States found itself alone as the world's greatest superpower, armed with the world's greatest economy, it looked forward to the fruits of a prosperous consumer's economy. But the war raised as many questions as it would settle and unleash new social forces at home and abroad that confronted generations of Americans to come.
Thinking, let's see.
Already, I think the Soviets would disagree. I think the Soviets would think that they are also the greatest superpower. Like, that the U.S. was not alone. But maybe that comes a little bit later.
Alright, who's reading section 2?
Alright, are we gonna switch off each section, Yasha, or are we gonna, like, what are you thinking?
Yeah, we should go cycle.
Alright, I'll do section 2 then. Alright. Roman numeral 2. The origins of the Pacific War. Really, we're starting with that? Wow, okay. Yeah, America. Woohoo. Alright. Although the United States joined the war in 1941, 2 years after Europe exploded into conflict in 1939, the path to the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor, the surprise attack that threw the United States headlong into war, began much earlier. For the Empire of Japan, the war had begun a decade before Pearl Harbor.
There's a turn.
Whoa. On September 18th, 1931, a small explosion tore up railroad tracks controlled by the Japanese-owned South Manchuria Railroad, near the city of Shenyang,
Shenyang.
yeah, and the Chinese province of Manchuria. The railway company condemned the bombing as the work of anti-Japanese Chinese dissidents. Evidence, though, suggests that the initial explosion was neither an act of Chinese anti-Japanese sentiment nor an accident, but an elaborate ruse planned by the Japanese to provide a basis for invasion. In response, the privately operated Japanese Guangdong Army began shelling the Shenyang garrison the next day, and the garrison fell before nightfall. Hungry for Chinese territory and witnessing the weakness and disorganization of Chinese forces, but under the pressure of protecting Japanese citizens and investments, the Japanese Imperial Army ordered a full-scale invasion of Manchuria. The invasion was swift. Without a centralized Chinese army, the Japanese quickly defeated isolated Chinese warlords, and by the end of February 1932, all of Manchuria was firmly under Japanese control. Japan established the nation of Manchukuo out of the former province of Manchuria.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, this seemingly small skirmish... No, never mind.
Also, you can read a little slower, perhaps? I don't know.
A little slower? Okie dokie.
Okie dokie.
Make sure you're writing down Japanese Empire. Make sure you know what the Japanese Empire is.
Sure thing.
Am I good to go?
Yeah.
Alright. This seemingly small skirmish, known by the Chinese as the September 18th incident, and the Japanese as the Manchurian Incident, sparked a war that would last 13 years and claimed the lives of over 35 million people. Comprehending Japanese motivations for attacking China and the grueling stalemate of the ensuing war are crucial for understanding Japan's seemingly unprovoked attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, on December 7th, 1941, and therefore for understanding the involvement of the United States in World War II as well. I just want you to know that there was at least 10 commas in that one sentence, and I really did not enjoy that. Pearl Harbor, comma,
Wait,
Hawaii,
Daniel, do you
comma.
have, like, speakers
There's
on or
actually
something?
5.
I
yeah,
think I might have like
he was
Discord
actually
speakers on. Let me check.
Yeah, make sure you mute the live stream so it doesn't echo.
My live stream's muted. It's just
No, it's
the actual
us hearing ourselves, so it's his own speakers or whatever.
Yeah, Daniel, put headphones on.
fine. I'll switch. Okay, one sec.
Why would you ever go onto a live stream using speakers?
Daniel, you're terrible.
You guys, I don't know how technology works.
Okay, well then listen to us and don't ever not wear headphones.
Fine, I'm wearing headphones. Yeah. But then people can't hear me because it's like poor quality. Fine.
So this is what you could call a false flag attack, which means you make it seem like someone else attacked you when really you put it up yourself. It's actually very common. Like we've done it too. Everyone does these.
Thank you, Yasha.
But it's
That's
really
actually
cool.
nifty.
Basically, when you're powerful, you can do whatever you want because who's gonna stop you?
Oh my god, you're so tiny. Haha, he's so cute and tiny.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. You're
Now we
good.
can.
Ow. Alright, y'all, like, make sure, like, I can chat. Can you hear me? Because last time with my speakers, I sounded terrible, so I want to sound less terrible.
Daniel, I
It
can hear
sounds like
you.
you're 10 feet away.
I'm the one on the stream. You're chilling.
Alright, thank you, Nick. Very cool.
Look, it's Ryan. Look at him go.
Alright. Where were we?
Anyways, despite their rapid advance into Manchuria, the Japanese put off the invasion of China for nearly 3 years. Japan occupied a precarious domestic and international position after the September 18th incidents. At home, Japan was driven by political factionalism due to its stagnating economy. Economy, that's the big word. Leaders were torn as to whether to address modernization and lack of natural resources through unilateral expansion, the conquest of resource-rich areas such as Manchuria, to export raw materials to domestic Japan, their Japanese industrial bases, such as Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Whoa, those places show up later on.
Really? I wonder where.
I've never heard those names before. Or international cooperation, a philosophy of pan-Asianism in an anti-Western coalition that would push the colonial powers out of Asia. Ultimately, after a series of political crises and assassinations, inflamed tensions, pro-war elements within the Japanese military triumphed over the more moderate civilian government. Japan committed itself to aggressive military expansion.
Okay.
Okay,
So basically,
yeah.
Japan was all broken up into factions because of their economy, and they all decided to become warlike and go and conquer Manchuria in order to.
They're
stimulate
like,
exports.
what do we do?
Not just-
There are many
not just-
options here. Let's just destroy
well,
everyone else.
Not just that. They also wanted to get more like raw material because Japan's like a tiny little island. They're like, hey,
Yeah.
we want like more like.
Yeah, they wanted
It
It is,
resources.
it is important to understand in Japanese history that the struggle for resources is very present.
Yeah.
Slurp water. Yep. All right.
Alright.
Anyways, so y'all ready?
Sure
Yeah.
are.
All right. Get ready for me to butcher like 7 Chinese names in a row because there's a whole bunch of big ones coming up.
Some for you.
All right, Yasha, I give you power over this paragraph.
Okay. Chinese leaders Chiang Kai-shek and Zheng Shuiliang
Damn.
appealed to the
Perfect.
League of Nations
Wow.
for assistance against Japan. The United States supported the Chinese protest, proclaiming the Stimson Doctrine in January 1932, which refused to recognize any state established as a result of Japanese aggression.
Wait, what? That's a
Meanwhile-
specific thing.
Stimson Doctorate. Write that down.
Yeah.
STIM.
So, like-
Doctorate.
So the
Basically-
UN
Oh, that's
refused to
interesting. Never mind.
recognize
I just,
any
like, totally
Japans-
misinterpreted that.
Any of Japan's like colonized.
Well, kind of like
Side note,
Japanese
Ryan's asking
puppets.
if someone's in control of individual sound levels. Nick.
I am, yes. Is somebody too loud? Because I will gladly change whatever.
Japan is an island by the sea filled with volcanoes and it's beautiful.
Let's see. US.
Sure.
Okay, what's the name of the like?
Stimson.
It's the Stimson Doctrine. STIMSON.
Ryan.
Why can't I see this?
Japan is an island by the sea filled with volcanoes, and it's beautiful.
Sounds like a Bill Ward's thing.
Oh,
It's
it's
gotta be
definitely
a Bill
Bill
Words thing. He added
love
musical
Bill
notes. It's gotta be Bill Words.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Alrighty.
Japan. Alrighty.
Whoa.
Japan isolated.
We only got halfway through
Isolation.
that paragraph.
No, we didn't. Did we actually?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we
Yeah.
did. Oh yeah, y'all should finish it up.
Okay. Meanwhile, the League of Nations sent Englishman Victor Bulwer-Lytton to investigate the September 18th incident. After a 6-month investigation, Bulwer-Lytton found the Japanese guilty of inciting the September 18th incident and demanded the return of Manchuria to China. The Japanese withdrew from the League of Nations in March 1930.
Damn. Okay, found
The
Japanese.
League of Nations is pretty
Whoa. Oh, yeah.
useless.
The League of the Nations is pretty useless, but fun fact, it led to the UN after World War II. But pre-World War II, the League of Nations was pretty trashy.
Didn't do
And
anything because they didn't have the U.S.
Yeah, and Woodrow Wilson was like, we're gonna make the UN, or not the UN, the League of Nations, and then like Congress and Henry Cabot Lodge were like, no, we don't want to be part of the League of Nations. That's for nerds. Until they voted it down, and then Woodrow Wilson was sad because his everything failed, and so then they didn't do the League of Nations, and the U.S. wasn't League of Nations, and then everyone was sad, and that's how World War II started.
Basically, the British guy came, and Japan was like, "It's been real," and now.
Yeah, literally, they just dip.
Oh wait, withdrew
Okey-dokey.
from league as a result. Yeah, okay.
Okie dokie.
Isolationism,
Alright,
let's
back
go.
to me reading. Alright, Japan isolated itself from the world. Its diplomatic isolation empowered radical military leaders who could point to Japanese military success in Manchuria and compare it to the diplomatic failures of the civilian government.
Oof.
The military took over Japanese policy, and in the military's eyes, the conquest of China would not only provide for Japan's industrial needs, it would secure Japanese supremacy in East Asia. So that's actually kind of cool. So instead of the ideas of Pan-Asia or Pan-Africanism, Pan-Africanism is really popular, but in Asia it was, instead of that, it was oh, we want to be the coolest country in Asia. Instead of being Pan-Asia, it will be Japan-Asia.
Japan's
Well, right.
Everything will be Japanese.
Yeah.
That's anime.
Also, Ryan, I've turned myself down to 64%. Tell me if that's good.
64. If you went up 5%, you'd be a fun number.
Oh, okay. Fine, Daniel. I'll go to 69% just for you.
Are you proud of me for making that joke?
No, I'm not, Daniel.
Now, everybody,
That was out of my comfort zone.
nice on 3. 3, 2, 1, nice.
Nice. Oh gosh.
Alright, let's
Alright,
keep going.
focus on the chapter. This is
Yeah,
what we're here
alright.
for, guys. Come on.
Yeah, that's true. The Japanese launched a full-scale invasion of China. It assaulted the Marco Polo Bridge on July 7th, 1937, and routed the forces of the Chinese National Revolutionary Army led by Chiang Kai-shek. The broken Chinese army gave up Beijing to the Japanese on August 8th. Shanghai on November 26th, and the capital Nanjing/Nanking on December 13th.
Oh, it's this. I remember this from World.
Oh, it's Nanjing, Nanking was pretty wacky. Between 250,000 and 300,000 people were killed, and tens of thousands of women were raped when the Japanese besieged and then sacked Nanjing. That's probably what you remember. The rape of Nanjing is a big thing.
Yeah, that's a key term, folks.
It sure is. Actually, that's the next sentence. The Western press labeled it as the rape of Nanjing.
Japan
to
kind
halt-
of sucks, honestly, in World War II.
Not gonna lie, you're spitting facts. To halt the invading enemy, Chiang Kai-shek adopted a scorched earth strategy of trading space for time. His nationalist government retreated inland, burning villages and destroying dams, and established a new capital at the Yangtze River port of Chongqing. Although the nationalist scorched earth policy hurt the Japanese military effort, it alienated scores of dislocated Chinese civilians, and it became a potent propaganda tool for the emerging Chinese Communist Party. Mao Zedong!
Mao Zedong.
Ha!
Mao
Mao
Zedong.
Zedong. Oh wait, you ready? Young Ming. Wait, no, shoot, I forgot it. What?
Sheng Zhao Qin
Chin Hong.
Sheng Zhao
Sheng
Qin
Zhao
Hong.
Chin Hong.
You guys.
Sweet Tang Song. Sweet Tang Song. Yeonmin Chin Republic.
Yeonmin Qing Republic. Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong.
That was a quick flashback to AP World History for all the OGs out there listening.
All the
Alright, back to
OGs.
All the OGs. Alright, Americans read about the brutal fighting in China, but the United States lacked both the will and the military power to oppose the Japanese invasion. After the gut-wrenching carnage of World War I, many Americans retreated towards isolationism by opposing any involvement in the conflagrations between, burning in Europe and Asia. And even if Americans wished to intervene, their military was lacking. The Japanese army was a technologically advanced force consisting of 4,100,000 men and 900,000 Chinese collaborators, and that was in China alone. The Japanese military was armed with modern rifles, artillery, armor, and aircraft. By 1940, the Japanese Navy was the third largest and among the most technologically advanced in the world.
Not gonna lie, Japanese tanks are a little bit of a joke.
Still, Chinese nationalists lobbied Washington for aid. Chiang Kai-shek's wife, Sung Mei Ling, these names are really making me not pronounce them correctly.
Interesting.
Known to the American public as Madame Chiang, led the effort. Born into a
Chung.
wealthy
One syllable.
Chang, what? I don't
Chiang.
know. Chiang.
Xiang.
Born into a
Xiang.
I can't say it. I'm Russian. Born into a wealthy Chinese merchant family in 1898, Madame Chung, yeah,
That's good.
spent much of her childhood in the United States and graduated from Wellesley College in 1917 with a major in English literature. In contrast to her gruff husband, Madame Chung was charming and able to use her knowledge of American culture and values to garner support for her husband and his government. But while the United States denounced Japanese aggression, it took no action. As Chinese nationalists fought for survival, the Communist Party was busy collecting people and supplies in the northwestern Shanghai province, or Shaanxi province. China had been at war with itself when the Japanese came. Nationalists battled a stubborn communist insurgency. In 1935, the nationalists threw the communists out of the fertile Chinese coast. But an ambitious young commander named Mao Zedong, recognized the power of the Chinese peasant population. Mao! In Shaanxi, Mao recruited from the local peasantry, building his forces from a meager 7,000 survivors at the end of the Long March in 1935 to a robust 1.2 million members by the end of the war. Wow. Now that's stonks right there. Although Japan had conquered much of the country, the nationalists regrouped and the communists rearmed. An uneasy truce paused the country's civil war and refocused efforts on the invaders. The Chinese could not dislodge the Japanese, but they could stall their advance. The war emerged in stalemate.
Was
Section
mired.
2 complete. Mired.
Okay.
Alright, wait, hold on.
Wacky truce.
So he went into China and he drafted all the peasants, and then
Who, Mao Zedong?
From India.
oh my gosh, okay. Increased.
See, we learned about this a lot in Nature World. So there's the Long March. So pretty much there's a whole bunch of civil unrest in China. There's a big civil war, and the communists lost originally, and so they were kicked out of the nice part of China, and they had to go walk into the weird desert part in the back of China where nobody actually wanted to be.
Oh.
Yeah.
And
China
so
has
they
some-
Wait, so they just
And that was called-
forced them to march back there for no
Yeah,
reason?
and that's called the Long March, and a ton of the Chinese communists died during that march. So by the end, there's only 7,000 survivors, and then throughout the war, Mao Zedong, using his Mao Zedong powers, got 1 million plus more members to communism in China. And then after World War II, the Chinese communism started.
So
Yay.
Japan and China both started ramping up their military stuff.
Well, China was
No,
kinda
China
no.
doesn't have. China doesn't have
China
an industry.
doesn't.
They just have a meat. They have meat shields.
Oh my god. I mean, the sad thing is that you're not wrong. At the time, they really didn't have industry. They just kind of had population.
China is super poor right now. They only come wealthier. China only becomes as powerful as it is to today, later, starting in the 60s, 80s.
Wacky. I mean, it's not like they certainly had exports and stuff, but yeah.
Their economy was pretty poor.
Also, hi India, and I'm sorry Ryan. Okay, that's my chat interaction.
Yep, that's just like that.
All right, Yasha, you're up for section 3. Go guest speaker.
Am I? Okay.
Yep.
Ooh, that looks like a fun photo.
Which one, the
Chapter
Nazi
3.
one?
They look
Origins of the European War.
stormtroopers.
But dude, it's great.
Actually, fun fact before we start.
Oh, goodness.
Okay,
Daniel, we all
stormtroopers-
know.
No. So stormtroopers actually came George Lucas was inspired by German stormtroopers in World War One, and okay, sorry, I'll stop. But it's really cool. Well, that's not cool, but actually, it's cool. You know what I'm.
Across the globe in Europe, the continent's major powers
Yeah,
were still struggling with the
Yeah,
after effects
Daniel.
of World War One. When the global economic crisis spiraled much of the continent into chaos, Germany's Weimar Republic collapsed with the economy, and out of the ashes emerged Adolf Hitler's National Socialists, the Nazis. Championing German racial supremacy, fascist government, and military expansionism, Hitler rose to power, and after aborted attempts to take power in Germany, became Chancellor in 1933, and the Nazis conquered German institutions. Democratic traditions were smashed. Leftist groups were purged. Hitler repudiated the punitive damages and strict military limitations of the Treaty of Versailles. He rebuilt the German military and navy. He reoccupied regions lost during the war and remilitarized the Rhineland, along the border with France. When the Spanish Civil War broke out in 1936, Hitler and Benito Mussolini, the fascist Italian leader who had risen to power in the 1920s, intervened for the Spanish fascists, toppling the communist Spanish Republican Party. Britain and France stood by warily and began to rebuild their militaries, anxious in the face of renewed Germany but still unwilling to draw Europe into another bloody war. In his autobiographical manifesto, Mein Kampf, Hitler advocated for the unification of Europe's German peoples under one nation and that nation's need for Lebensraum, or living space, particularly in Eastern Europe, to supply Germans with the land and resources needed for future prosperity. The Untermenschen, lesser humans, would have to go. But I mean, they kind of say nicely with have to go.
Have to go, that's the euphemism right there. Oh gosh.
Once in power, Hitler worked towards the twin goals of unification and expansion.
One sec.
And we have a big picture of
So Japan and Germany were doing the same thing.
Kind of.
Not really.
I mean, actually, kind of.
I mean, yeah, in a way.
Well, they both wanted more like living space in a really weird and like sick way.
Well, it's a little bit different because
the entire region to their race and culture.
well, the German peoples are kind of like more like Japanese people live in Japan, but like German, you can trace like Germanic roots back to like a lot of people have like Germanic roots. In a lot of countries, you can trace like Germanic lineage. But pretty much they thought they were like the shit, and they're like, okay, we need resources, and we're gonna go take over everything. And what's interesting is that it was caused by poor economies, not by strong economies. In 1938, Germany annexed Austria and set its sights on the Sudetenland, a large ethnically German area of Czechoslovakia. Britain and France, alarmed but still anxious to avoid war, agreed, without Czechoslovakia's input, that Germany would annex the region in return for promise to stop all future German aggression. They thought that Hitler could be appeased, but it became clear that his ambitions would continue pushing German expansion. In March 1939, Hitler took the rest of Czechoslovakia and began to make demands on Poland. Britain and France promised war, and war came. Hitler signed a secret agreement, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, with the Soviet Union that coordinated the splitting of Poland between the two powers and promised non-aggression thereafter. The European War began when the German Wehrmacht invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. Germans are really organized. They love these. They always do things on precise dates. Britain and France declared war 2 days later and mobilized their armies. Britain and France hoped that the Poles could hold out for 3 to 4 months, enough time for the Allies to intervene. Poland fell in 3 weeks.
Oof.
The German army, anxious to avoid the rigid, grinding war of attrition that took so many millions in the stalemate of World War I, built their new modern army for speed and maneuverability. German doctrine emphasized the use of tanks, planes, and motorized infantry that used trucks for transportation instead of marching, to concentrate forces, smash front lines, and wreak havoc behind the enemy's defenses. It was called Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. That's a pretty basic summary of Blitzkrieg.
So,
I mean, it worked, but yeah.
Hitler signed the Molotov.
Yeah, Molotov-Ribbentrop.
Oh, is that important? Okay.
And then September 1st is a good date.
Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact.
With the USSR to coordinate.
USSR, you mean USSR, Советский Социалистический Союз Республик, or something like that. Shoot, I should know it.
Decided, hey, we're gonna both take over this country and split it up, and then we'll be chilling.
Yeah, it's Poland, you know? It's not like Poland actually, like, yeah.
Who cares
Poland.
about the Poles?
Split up
It's just Poland.
Just Poland.
Just another, group of people and stuff.
Nah.
Yeah, no.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, basically, what Germany invents, and this becomes a really big doctrine in modern warfare, is that you concentrate forces and you get basically as many forces as you can behind enemy lines. So you find a hole, you find a little weak spot, and you open it. So instead of kind of warfare based on, well, we're going to be on a field or we're all going to be spread out, they were smart about it, but it was so novel that it crushed countries pretty quickly.
Yay.
After the fall of Poland, France and British allies braced for the inevitable German attack. And now we're going to see France being pretty incompetent. That's
So-
cool.
Oh yeah,
When-
France just World War II
France,
and
honestly,
not go well.
they had, the thing is, they had better tanks than Germany at the start of the war. They just had less tanks. And they were so ignorant. They had a really good defense plan, except they thought Germans could not drive tanks through the Ardennes. They were so ignorant about that fact. Just that one thing. If only they had actually considered the possibility of Germans driving panzers through the Ardennes, the tanks were very vulnerable and they could have been bombed. And it just, I have to say, French arrogance kind of lost them the war.
Well, I mean, technically they won the war, but like, yeah,
They didn't win the war. We won the war.
Yeah, well, technically they're
how annoying it was to we limited the supplies we gave to the French rebellion because instead of fighting against the Germans, they just stole weapons from themselves and were fighting like the fascist, communist, and democratic like French rebellion groups were fighting amongst themselves. That's how useless France was.
When did France and Britain start to get along?
France and Britain, they got along before World War One.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's been a while.
they were like allied for a while.
Yeah, they've been allies since.
Yeah, it's the Entente Cordiale.
I think they've been friends, such a long time.
Yeah, I think it was the French and Indian War that since then.
Oh, that makes sense. Well, no, but weren't they giving each other help even before then? I don't actually know.
Oh, before probably. Yeah.
Entente Cordiale.
What is that?
It
Napoleon.
was from no, not Napoleon.
No.
Napoleon.
All right, let's read.
After the fall of Poland, France and its British allies braced for an inevitable German attack. Throughout the winter of 1939 to 1940, however, fighting was mostly confined to smaller fronts in Norway. Belligerents called it the Sitzkrieg, sitting war, and this is also referred to as the phony war. But in May 1940, Hitler launched his attack into Western Europe. During the Germans' Schlieffen Plan of 1914 and the previous war, Germany attacked through the Netherlands and Belgium to avoid the prepared French defenses along the French-German border. This is leaving out some information. There was prepared defenses in Belgium, they just weren't as strong, basically. And the French did begin extending the Maginot Line across Belgium, but basically, they weren't really prepared as much as they should be.
Was the Maginot Line a literal wall?
The Maginot Line was, at this time in history,
Wasn't it a mound
best.
of earth?
It consisted of bunkers and huge cannons and artillery and pit boxes, and it was basically the strongest line of fortifications ever constructed.
Yeah, because that's the only geographical weak point into France, and
Yeah.
the Germans used it to run through and take Belgium.
Although,
Oh
even
my
though
gosh,
the
whoa,
Maginot
my
Line
thing
is
just lagged.
really strong, we see Erwin
You guys,
Rommel
I have to
actually
go
be able to
repark
break
the car
through the
quickly.
Maginot.
I'll be back in like 3 minutes.
Okay.
So Erwin Rommel actually breaks through the Maginot Line later, but that's just because he's Rommel, and Rommel's really cool.
All right.
Poland had fallen in 3 weeks. France lasted only a few weeks more. By June, Hitler was posing for photographs in front of the Eiffel Tower. Germany split France in half. Germany occupied and governed the north, and the south would be ruled under a puppet government in Vichy.
What is Vichy? What?
Vichy. So actually, part of the German strategy was to make the United Kingdom feel diplomatically isolated, basically. And so they made it seem, part of this puppet government was they made it seem like no one likes you anymore, UK. Come and basically give up. In the UK, we're like, no, we're not good enough. With France under heel, Hitler turned to Britain. Operation
Why?
Sea Line, the planned German invasion. Make sure you put that in your notes. Put the pose. The planned German invasion of the British Isles required air superiority over the English Channel. From June until October, the German Luftwaffe fought the Royal Air Force, RAF, for control of the sky. Despite having fewer planes, British pilots won the so-called Battle of Britain, saving the islands from immediate invasion and prompting the new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, to declare, "Never before in the field of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so few." Basically, the yeah, they don't talk. The reason why the
Dunkirk,
UK
right?
won the Battle of Britain was because they had really good radars that the Germans actually didn't know about. So that's where the idea, if you've ever heard the idea of like carrots helping your eyesight, that's that the British created.
Oh, that's pretty sick.
To explain their pilots. So they had all these radar stations, and they could properly allocate their forces in an efficient way.
So, are they skimming over the entire Battle of Dunkirk and that whole push into?
Dunkirk.
Wasn't that later?
No, yeah, they are skimming. Yeah, they're skimming over Dunkirk. Yeah, Dunkirk never happens.
Okay.
But I guess I'll explain like battles and stuff when we get to U.S. involvement.
Okay.
If Britain was safe from invasion, it was not immune from additional air attacks. Stymied in the Battle of Britain, Hitler began the Blitz, a bombing campaign against cities and civilians. Hoping to crush the British will to fight, the Luftwaffe bombed the cities of London, Liverpool, and Manchester every night from September to the following May. Children were sent far into the countryside to live with strangers to shield them from the bombings. Romanian residents took refuge in shelters and subway tunnels, emerging each morning to put out fires and bury the dead. The Blitz ended in June 1941, when Hitler, confident that Britain was temporarily out of the fight, launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union.
Ooh, they backstabbed Stalin.
Yeah, they did. You cannot trust Hitler.
No,
Really?
Never turn your back on Hitler.
Everyone, like even in the U.S., people really liked Hitler.
What?
Really?
Like, they thought he was a cool. They thought he was a
There
cool
was
guy before the war.
There was a
Oh.
lot of-
Huh.
Yeah, right.
That kind of, yeah. Whack.
Okay, wait. Where's all that?
I have not been approached by Audible.
You should try it out, man. Honestly,
There we
reading audiobooks for a living, that'd be nice.
But I do speak.
Was it Daniel? It's Daniel.
It's Daniel, he's back again.
Daniel. We're talking about Barbarossa, Daniel.
We can't hear you.
Hoping to capture agricultural lands, seize oil fields, and break the military threats of Stalin's Soviet Union, Hitler broke the two powers' 1939 non-aggression pact, and on June 22nd invaded the Soviet Union.
Oh my gosh, okay, I'm back.
It was the largest land
I accidentally stepped on my dog's tail. I feel really bad now. I
France and
can go
Poland
back
had
to-
fallen in
Daniel,
weeks,
you're back just in time for Russia.
and German officials hoped
Russia,
to break
alright, you guys,
before
Russia
the
won
winter.
World War II, side note. Russia's the
And
winner.
initially, the Blitzkrieg worked.
Russia
The
won
German
World War
military
II.
quickly conquered
The
the
US
loss
is
of
big.
land,
We can stop
and
for
led
The
to
US
Daniel.
is
thousands
just
of
doing
citizens.
weird stuff in Hawaii. Russia
But
won
Russia
World
was
War
too
II.
big, and the Soviets
throwing
were
it out
Oh my
there.
goodness, what
conquered
is
by
going
Poland
on?
across the Pacific Ocean. After recovering from the
Союз
initial
нерушимый республик
Stalin moved his
свободных
sacrifice of the
великих.
Urals out of range of the Luftwaffe. He ordered his retreating army to adopt a scorched earth policy, to move east and destroy food, rails, shelters to stymie the advancing German army.
Wait, where even are you?
Fun fact.
Oh, you're there. Okay.
Fun fact.
Split into
It's
three
Stimmy, by
pieces
the way. I
and
think it's
stood at the
Stimmy.
gate of Moscow, Stalingrad, and
It
Leningrad.
is time?
But supply lines now stretched thousands of miles. Soviet infrastructure had been destroyed. Partisans.
Wait. As a
German lines.
Russian, I have to stop this for a second. Okay, they mentioned Leningrad with
Russian
one
was
word.
so bad.
Alright. The siege of Leningrad, that was like a big thing. They can't just say that in one word. That was like a literal over year-long siege of Leningrad where like, fun fact, you guys know this guy named Shostakovich? He was in Leningrad, he composed a symphony there during the siege, but that's irrelevant at the moment. It's not irrelevant, but it's cool. But anyway, so like, they were like in Leningrad, and like they had no food and they were starving, but like they survived Go Russia, and they pushed off the Germans, and then they like absolutely wrecked the Germans with like the battle of
Basically,
like
what Daniel's trying to
and, like-
say is the Russians threw as many humans as possible as they could to stop the better German army.
You know what?
Got him.
Russia won.
However, with Russia, the T-34 is possibly the best tank ever made, and it was the most mass-produced tank. And there's a
Guys,
clip of Hitler
We should read.
talking about Hitler was saying, if you told me that there are 35,000 tanks, that a nation has 35,000 tanks. I tell you, you're wrong, and that you're seeing things 2 to 10 times bigger than they actually are. He was scared, but Russia, it was pretty incredible. Like, there would be, what was the battle? There was a battle, I think they had like 1 million people in it. Was that Kursk?
Oh, the Kursk battle was really cool also. There's so many like really cool ones.
Russia would literally, they would make tanks, and the tanks would roll out from the factories onto the battlefield.
Literally, like, actually, do you guys know, so in Moscow, like, when Moscow was, like, under siege, or not under siege, it was, like, about to be conquered by, like, Nazi forces, like, they had this, like, victory parade, which actually, fun fact, that occurs, like, every single year in Russia now, but, they had a military parade, and literally, like, the soldiers would march through the parade, and they'd just march out onto the battlefield out of the parade to, like, fight, and they usually die, but, like, yeah, they just march straight out of the parade onto the battlefield. Alright, sorry, I just get excited with Russian stuff. You can keep reading, Yasha.
And the brutal Russian winter arrived. It's also important to note that Russia brought in their Siberian troops in the winter.
We sure did. Siberia. We had the bears.
Germany had won massive gains, but the winter found Germany exhausted and overextended. The German army starved Leningrad to death in interminable siege. See the siege. In the south, at Stalingrad, the two armies bled themselves to death in the destroyed city, and in the center, on the outskirts of Moscow, in the site of the capital city, the German army faltered and fell back. It was the Soviet Union that broke Hitler's army. Yeah,
that is true. That's fact.
The
Soviet Union destroyed them. Yeah.
25 million Soviet soldiers and civilians died during the Great Patriotic War. I heard it was 20 million, but 25.
It was like more. There's like
and roughly 80% of all German casualties during the war came on the Eastern Front. So there's actually a thing they
that's the stuff.
They skim over it, but my dad talked about this. So in Russia, it was not World War II. It was the Great Patriotic War, and the only two countries that fought were Germany and Russia.
It's literally like it's like the Well, that's what it's called. Cause like it was like Russia fighting for its survival. It's called that.
No, it was not for survival because the Soviet Union would never be so weak. We had to defeat the German invaders.
All right.
Just a piece of Soviet Union, propaganda. Kind of interesting.
Next session.
The German army and its various conscripts suffered 850,000 casualties at the Battle of Stalingrad alone. In December 1941, Germany began its long retreat.
Woohoo!
And later we can talk about how scary the Soviet Union is.
We don't have to mention that. That's fine. Oh, it's time for me to read, you guys. You guys ready?
The Nazis, they ran away from the Soviets to go surrender to the Americans.
Like, they actually did, which is like a funny story. Alright, you guys, time for me to read. Actually, can you guys still hear me? Like, I feel like you guys can't hear me.
Yes, we can, and you're fine.
Alright, Roman numeral 4. I love that song. The United States and the European War. Alright. While Hitler marched across Europe, the Japanese continued their war in the Pacific. In 1939, the United States dissolved its trade treaties with Japan, and the following year cut off supplies of war materials by embargoing oil, steel, rubber, and other vital goods. It was hoped that economic pressure would shut down the Japanese war machine. Instead, Japan's resource-starved military launched invasions across the Pacific to sustain its war effort. The Japanese called their new empire the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. That's a long name. And with the cry, Asia for the Asians, made war against European powers and independent nations throughout the region. Diplomatic relations between Japan and the United States collapsed. The United States demanded that Japan withdraw from China. Japan considered the oil embargo a de facto declaration of war. Another cool fact, actually, is that for a lot of these countries that are like under like British colonial control or French colonial control, they actually welcomed the Japanese like invasion because they're like, yeah, we're not gonna be colonized anymore. We're gonna be like free, like, well, not free, but we're gonna be like under Asian control, not under like European control. So they're kind of like cool with the Japanese invasion, even though that later on turned out not working out that well for them. But for the moment, they're happy. Alright, Japanese military planners believed that American intervention was inevitable. Believing that American intervention was inevitable, planned a coordinated Pacific offensive to neutralize the United States and other European powers, and provide time for Japan to complete its conquests and fortify its positions. Oh, this is America time. On the morning of December 7th, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Japanese military planes hoped to destroy enough battleships and aircraft carriers to cripple American naval power for years. 2,400 Americans were killed in the attack. American isolationism fell at Pearl Harbor. Japan also assaulted Hong Kong, the Philippines, and American holdings throughout the Pacific. But it was the attack on Hawaii that threw the United States into a global conflict. Oh, this is a famous quote, y'all. You should write it down. Franklin Roosevelt called December 7th a date which will live in infamy, and called for a declaration of war, which Congress answered within hours. Within a week of Pearl Harbor, the United States had declared war on the entire Axis, turning two previously separate conflicts into a true world war. Let's go get them, U.S. Marines. Woo. Oh my gosh. Alright,
Wait,
some
wait,
cool
a second.
pictures.
It wasn't.
Yeah, those are the cool pictures.
Are you a girl with a star-spangled heart? Join the whack now.
Join the whack.
Join the whack.
Who?
So
Wait,
our
what
claim
even
to
was the whack?
so our claim to fame is that we made it a world war.
Well,
Yes.
when you put it that way. Go America, woohoo! The American war began slowly. Britain had stood alone militarily in Europe, because France was just off doing weird stuff with Charles de Gaulle and having weird retreat / weird whatever France. Oh, yeah. Had stood alone militarily in Europe, but American supplies had bolstered the resistance. Hitler unleashed his U-boat wolf packs into the Atlantic Ocean with orders to sink anything carrying aid to Britain. Oh, this may leave.
Yeah,
Wait,
Yasha's
Yasha.
going AFK. It's fine.
Oh, rip it, gosh. Okay. Where was I? Sorry. Yeah, into the Atlantic Ocean with orders to sink anything carrying aid to Britain. But Britain's and the United States' superior tactics and technology won them the Battle of the Atlantic. That's actually another pretty cool battle, but we're not going into it because APUSH. British code breakers, the Enigma code. Oh,
Yo.
British code breakers cracked Germany's radio codes on the surge of the intelligence dubbed Ultra. That's actually really, really cool. Coupled with massive naval convoys escorted by destroyers, armed with sonar and depth charges, gave the advantage to the Allies. And by 1942, Hitler's Kriegsmarine was losing ships faster than they could be built. So just quick thing while you guys are typing up, the Enigma, everything with the Enigma stuff is super, super, super cool. There's actually there's a movie I think it's on Netflix now. It's Benedict Cumberbatch. Who's
Yeah,
go
go
Doctor
watch it. It's
Strange.
great.
I watched that movie.
It's the imitation game, right?
It's real, yeah, it's an imitation game. It's
Go
actually
watch
it's historically accurate. It's really sad, but it's a really, really, really good.
It's sad,
And
but it's
plus,
actually really
you know,
cool. Yeah.
Benedict Cumberbatch, you can't go wrong.
Yeah,
I
honestly.
mean, he's such Benedict Cumberbatch. He's a beautiful man. He's just.
Have you seen him?
I'm
Have you
saying
seen the video of Benedict Cumberbatch?
What's the movie called?
The
growl?
Imitation
it's called
Game.
Imitation Game. Josh, you should actually watch it. It's really good.
Have you
and
seen
it's
the movie of Benedict Cumberbatch growling to be Smaug in The Hobbit? It's very funny.
I have not. But anything Benedict Cumberbatch is just automatically good. That's the way it is. Anyways,
It's so into it. It's amazing.
but anyways, the Enigma code is really cool, and that in combination with actually Navajo code breakers, which is really cool. It's the Navajo tribe that use Navajo language because other countries throughout the world had no idea what Navajo language was, and they used that in combination with Enigma. So Enigma was in the eastern front, so in Europe, and then Navajo was in the Pacific, and both of those two codes really helped the Allies win the war. It was some cool spy stuff, which is actually really cool. Anyways, so in North Africa in 1942, British victory at El Alamein began pushing the Germans back. In November, the first American combat troops entered the European war, launching in French Morocco and pushing the Germans east while the British pushed west. By 1943, the Allies had pushed Axis forces out of Africa. In January, President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill met at Casablanca to discuss the next steps of the European war. Churchill convinced Roosevelt to chase the Axis up Italy into the soft underbelly of Europe. Afterward, Roosevelt announced to the press that the Allies would accept nothing less than unconditional surrender.
Hold on.
Meanwhile,
Hold on.
I cannot sing. I was trying to do the Jeopardy theme song, but there goes that. Bum, 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 bum. Actually, fun fact while we're waiting for Josh to finish up. Who here knows the date that World War II ended?
You.
Oh, come on. People gotta know this stuff.
I have no dates.
It's
Sorry, but
Don't
like,
make me
September
sad.
2nd, 1945.
yeah, Google.
That's just googling it. You know, that's not the official like Russian. Whatever. Fine.
No
Fine,
one
listen to
cares about
Google.
the Russian date, Daniel. Other than
Josh,
you.
I care.
That's literally what I just said.
That's true. You know what, Josh? Stop being correct.
Alright, let's.
You know what?
Daniel,
I'm
you-
sure-
Daniel, 2
sorry.
plus 2 is 5.
Hey, don't use 1984 on me. That's no.
Daniel, come
Okay.
on.
Sorry. Okay. Meanwhile, sorry, I got distracted. Meanwhile, the Army Air Force (AAF) sent hundreds and eventually thousands of bombers to England in preparation for a massive strategic bombing campaign against Germany. The plan was to bomb Germany around the clock. American bombers hit German ball bearing factories, rail yards, oil fields, and manufacturing centers during the day, while the British RAF carpet bombed German cities at night. Flying in formation, they initially flew unescorted, since many believed that bombers equipped with defensive firepower flew too high and too fast to be attacked. However, advanced German technology allowed fighters to easily shoot down the lumbering bombers. On some disastrous missions, the Germans shot down almost 50% of American aircraft. However, the advent and implementation of long-range escort fighters let the bombers hit their targets more accurately, while fighters confronted opposing German aircraft.
God, horrid. Anyway,
Yeah, carpet bombing is not cool. They just like go to like a civilian location and just like bomb everything. Literally just to bomb everything.
Nice.
Super nice. Civilian casualties. Woohoo. Oh my gosh, Katya knows it's May 9th.
Katya knows. Yeah, she's like, hi, May 9th, May 9th, May 9th.
See, thank
Socialism
you,
can
Katya.
happen
See, people-
anywhere.
people-
Smiley face.
See, people know. See, great, Katya. Thank you, Katya. Alright, in the wake of the Soviets' victory at Stalingrad, the Big Three, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, met in Tehran in November 1943, dismissing Africa and Italy as a sideshow. Stalin demanded that Britain and the United States invade France to relieve pressure on the Eastern Front. Churchill was hesitant, but Roosevelt was eager. The invasion was tentatively scheduled for 1944. D-Day. Woohoo. Normandy. Back in Italy, the soft underbelly turned out to be much tougher than Churchill had imagined. Italy's narrow, mountainous terrain gave the defending Axis the advantage. Movement up the peninsula was slow, and in some places conditions returned to the trench-like warfare of World War I. Americans attempted to land troops behind them at Anzio, on the western coast of Italy, but surrounded, they suffered heavy casualties. Still, the Allies pushed up the peninsula. Mussolini's government revolted, and a new Italian government quickly made peace. On the day that American armies entered Rome, American, British, and Canadian forces launched Operation Overlord, the long-awaited invasion of France. D-Day, as it became popularly known, was the largest amphibious assault in history. American General Dwight Eisenhower was uncertain enough of the attack chances that the night before the invasion, he wrote two speeches, one for success and one for failure. That's kind of sus. The Allied landings in Normandy were successful, and although progress across France was much slower than hoped for, Paris was liberated roughly 2 months later. Allied bombing expeditions, meanwhile, continued to level German cities and industrial capacity. Perhaps 400,000 German civilians were killed by Allied bombing. The Nazis were crumbling on both
Daniel, go slower. Just
Okay.
read slower.
sides. Okay. The Nazis were crumbling on both fronts. Hitler tried but failed to turn the war into his favor on the West. The Battle of the Bulge failed to drive the Allies. Battle of the Bulge is like one of the bigger battles for the Western front. Failed to drive the Allies back to the Eastern English Channel, but the delay cost the Allies the winter. The invasion of Germany would have to wait, while the Soviet Union continued its relentless push westward, ravaging German populations in retribution for German war crimes. Go Soviet Union!
Ooh, that was a lot of fancy
Woo,
words.
woo. German counterattacks in the east failed to dislodge the Soviet advance, destroying any last chance Germany might have had to regain the initiative. 1945 dawned with the end of European war in sight. The Big Three met again at Yalta in the Soviet Union, where they reaffirmed the demand for Hitler's unconditional surrender and began the plan for post-war Europe. The Soviet Union reached Germany in January, and the Americans crossed the Rhine in March. In late April, American and Soviet troops met at the Elbe, while the Soviets pushed relentlessly by Stalin to reach Berlin first and took the capital city in May, days after Hitler and his high command had committed suicide in a city bunker. Germany was conquered, the European war was over. Allied leaders met again, this time at Potsdam, Germany, where it was decided that Germany would be divided into pieces according to current Allied occupation. with Berlin likewise divided, pending future elections. Stalin also agreed to join the fight against Japan in approximately 3 months. That's actually a good, cool thing.
Stop.
So, yeah, I am. That eventually led to like Eastern Germany, Western Germany, and all like the weird like stuff with that. Like the wall that was put up and all that was because the Soviet Union came from one side and like the Western like capitalist forces came from the other side. So it's like capitalism versus socialism and a whole bunch of drama with that. Is Yasha back here? Is he just like chilling?
Yeah, he
Yasha wants to
come
get put back in.
There you go, Yasha.
Have fun reading.
Dresden.
Yes, Dresden.
Because we talk about it talks about Cologne, but there's no Dresden. Dresden was like we killed a ton of people.
Well, it mentioned like the civilian bombings multiple times. It's just it's not good.
Okay, where are you guys right now? Are you on 5?
We are on 5.
Just got
You
to
mean
5.
Roman? We are on Roman numeral 5. Gotta
Okay.
make it fancy.
Are you reading this one, Daniel?
No, this one's up to you, but I think we're waiting for some people to finish up typing. So while people are still typing, I'll talk some more about cool Russian Soviet stuff. I think that's interesting to everybody. What we got? What's the cool, fun thing to talk about? Well, besides like the Berlin Wall that was put up, and like later on with like Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall and all that stuff.
Why did
That's
they
not
put the
a-
wall up to start with?
Well, they wanted to separate Eastern Germany
'Cause
from Western
people-
Germany.
No, the
Because
Soviets
people-
did that because they were jealous. People were
They
leaving.
put it up because people
Berlin.
wanted to leave Eastern Germany to go to Western Germany because like there's so much stuff in Western
Because East
Germany.
Germany sucks.
East
Germany
Berlin
just kinda-
was controlled by the Soviets, and
West Germany was
Oh
controlled
yeah,
by,
we did a map
yeah.
on this last year, didn't we, Nick?
yes,
Josh, you gotta know this stuff. Yeah. So one half was like, and also it was like the economics. That's the word. We're different because on the eastern side it was like communism, and on the left hand side, capitalism. And so the two like ideas clashed with each other a lot, and it was awkward.
and there was a lot of nasty stuff that happened at the wall.
There sure was
Woo.
nasty stuff. Woohoo!
Alright. Who's
Section
reading?
All right, Yasha,
5.
go ahead, read.
The United States and the Japanese War. As Americans celebrated VE, Victory in Europe Day, they redirected their full attention to the still raging Pacific War. As in Europe, the war in the Pacific started slowly. After Pearl Harbor, the American-controlled Philippine archipelago fell to Japan.
It's archipelago, you were right the first time.
I know. After running out of ammunition and supplies, the garrison of American and Filipino soldiers surrendered. The prisoners were marched 80 miles to their prisoner of war camp without food, water, or rest. 10,000 died on the Bataan Death March.
Wait, where was that?
It was in the Philippines.
Yeah, American soldiers got captured.
Okay.
But as Americans mobilized their armed forces, the tide turned. In the summer of 1942, American naval victories at the Battle of the Coral Sea and the aircraft carrier duel at the Battle of Midway crippled Japan's Pacific naval operation. To dislodge Japan's hold of the Pacific, the U.S. military began island hopping, attacking island after island, bypassing the strongest but seizing those capable of holding airfields to continue pushing Japan out of the region. Combat was vicious. At Guadalcanal, American soldiers saw Japanese soldiers launch suicidal charges rather than surrender. Many Japanese soldiers refused to be taken prisoner or to take prisoners themselves. Such tactics, coupled with American racial prejudice, turned the Pacific theater into a more brutal and barbarous conflict than the European theater. So some fun facts. So 1 in 3 German soldiers surrendered, 1 in 300 Japanese soldiers surrendered.
Right.
Also,
That was like deeply ingrained.
Kind of
in
makes
their
sense,
culture.
because, yeah, it's just Japanese culture, yeah.
so
Like
in,
there's like the whole samurai culture before that and stuff.
in the European front, maybe to talk about them, I think it talks about them shooting at the medics.
I might just keep reading it.
Hacksaw Ridge.
Hacksaw Ridge. I need to watch that. I haven't seen that yet. I need to watch that. I need to watch
Let's watch it
the
together, Daniel.
You know, in the European
Yeah,
theater,
we can watch it together. That'd be so fun.
if you were a medic, the Germans would honor that. If you're a medic, the Japanese could care less, honestly. Like a Red Cross means nothing to the Japanese.
Fuck.
But
What?
Japanese defenders fought tenaciously. Well, few battles were as one-sided as the Battle of the Philippine Sea, or what the Americans called the Japanese counterattack, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japanese soldiers fled the Americans in their advance across the Pacific. At Iwo Jima, an 8-square-mile island of volcanic rock, Hacksaw Ridge, 17,000 Japanese soldiers held the island against 70,000 Marines for over a month. At the cost of nearly their entire force, they inflicted almost 30,000 casualties before the island was lost. By February 1945, American bombers were in range of the mainland. This is, I mean, American bombers did hit the mainland before, but that was like on carriers. Doolittle Raid is cool. Bombers hit Japan's industrial facilities but suffered high casualties. To spare bomber crews from dangerous daylight raids and to achieve maximum effect against Japan's wooden cities, wooden and paper, many American bombers dropped incendiary weapons that created massive firestorms and wreaked havoc on Japanese cities. Over 60 Japanese cities were firebombed. American firebombs killed 100,000 civilians in Tokyo on March 1945.
Whew.
Yeah, actually,
100,000?
that was like people always talk about like the nuclear weapons, but like
the firebombing
the fire bombings and that like the fire bombings were almost they weren't worse casualties wise. They just like
wait, were they actually just straight out worse?
Like early like wise like they weren't, but like in just like sheer deaths they were way worse because like they just like burned like cities. Like,
well, because the Japanese cities were mostly paper.
Jeez,
and, like,
no, yeah, that's more okay. Or Hiroshima.
Yes, so they just dropped firebombs and just like lit up cities on fire and
like,
everyone just like burned up.
We think that the thing is we kind of address ourselves as good guys, but there are some like chapters in U.S. history and like
There sure are.
It's kind of like it's just a little bit sadistic in my opinion when you say, okay, so these guys. Their houses are really flammable. Let's use napalm. You know?
God, yeah. Hiroshima was between 90,000 and 146,000. And Nagasaki was between 39,000 and 80,000. So, like, yeah, this incendiary shit is even worse, which is crazy.
You look at those numbers and then you forget that, and they look really big, but you forget that, like, an equivalent of the entire population of California, like 50 million people died in
Mm-hmm.
And like the majority of that was in the Soviet Union.
and from disease.
Yep.
Also, 50 million was not the number of people, and it was not the number of people in California.
It was like 80 million. It was a lot more than that.
Yeah.
2 Californias.
Yeah, the population of California, that number died in combat, and then the same number died from disease.
In June 1945, after 80 days of fighting and tens of thousands of casualties, the Americans captured the island of Okinawa. The mainland of Japan was open before them. It was a viable base from which to launch a full invasion of the Japanese homeland and end the war. Estimates varied, but given the tenacity of Japanese soldiers fighting on islands far from their home, I write about this in my nuclear paper. Some officials estimated that an invasion of the Japanese mainland could cost 500,000 American casualties and perhaps millions of Japanese casualties, and perhaps millions of Japanese civilians. Historians debate the many motivations that ultimately drove the Americans to use atomic weapons. American officials criticized the decision, but these would be the numbers later cited by government leaders and military officials to justify their use. Early in the war, fearing that the Germans might develop an atomic bomb, the Germans even got to the moon before us.
No.
Wait, what?
No.
That's just
Wait, what?
Pause.
What did you just say?
The U.S. government launched the Manhattan Project, a hugely expensive, ambitious program to harness atomic energy and create a single weapon capable of leveling cities. UC Berkeley, Lawrence Livermore Laboratory.
Yeah.
The Americans successfully exploded. Oh yeah, Willard Libby. He worked on the Manhattan Project before he found radiocarbon dating.
And he went to Annalee High School.
That's
Exactly.
pretty crazy.
Yeah, Los
You
Alamos.
guys, I know Annalee High School.
Dude, me too.
The Americans successfully exploded the world's first nuclear device, Trinity, in New Mexico in July 1945. Physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, the director of the Los Alamos Laboratory, where the bomb was designed, later recalled that the event reminded him of Hindu scripture. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Yay.
2 more bombs, a fat man and a little boy, were built and detonated over 2 Japanese cities in August. They name them. Like, they name them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Imagine it's like, you're like, so 80,000 people have been killed by like Fat Man or Little Boy. Like,
That's so sad.
Well, I
it's
mean,
like rubbing salt.
Yeah, it
When you
literally
have-
is like, oh yeah, you got killed by Fat Man. Like what? That's terrible.
when you
Yeah.
have a weapon, like especially at the time when you have a weapon of such awful, horrifying, legendary proportions, it makes sense that you name it, and like the brutal intimidation factor also is amplified by that, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah,
God.
definitely.
Were built and detonated. 2 more bombs, Fat Man and Little Boy, were built and detonated over 2 Japanese cities in August. Hiroshima was hit on August 6th. Over 100,000 civilians were killed. Nagasaki followed on August 9th. Perhaps 80,000 civilians were killed. Emperor Hirohito announced the surrender of Japan on August 15th. On September 2nd, by the battleship USS Missouri, delegates from the Japanese government formally signed their surrender. World War II was over.
All right,
Finally over.
time for me to read.
Yeah. Wait. 1 second.
Where was? Hold on.
Okay, so why are there so many more sections if the war is over?
Well, because we have to talk about the soldiers' experience. We
Wait.
have to talk about like everybody's experiences now.
I don't
Yeah.
care.
How many more sections are there?
Come on, Josh.
Soldiers'
I know.
experience, wartime economy, women in World War II. Oh my goodness, I thought we were like near the end. Okay.
No.
No,
Well, we're
We're
like-
like halfway through.
We're over. Yeah, we're over halfway through.
Jeez.
All right. Anyways, let's zoom through this. All right, you guys ready?
I guess so.
Roman numeral 6. Soldier experiences.
V.
V6. Alright. Almost 18 million men served in World War II. Volunteers rushed to join the military after Pearl Harbor, but the majority, over 10 million, were drafted into service. Volunteers could express their preference for assignment, and many preempted the draft by volunteering. Regardless, recruits judged IA, fit for service, were moved into basic training, where soldiers were developed physically and trained in the basic use of weapons and military equipment. Soldiers were indoctrinated into the chain of command and introduced to military life. After basics, soldiers moved on to more specialized training. For example, combat infantrymen received additional weapons and tactical training, and radio operators learned transmission codes and the operations of a field radio. Afterwards, an individual's experience varied depending on what service he entered and to what theater he was assigned. Soldiers and Marines bore the brunt of the on-ground combat. After transportation to the front by trains, ships, and trucks, they could expect to march carrying packs weighing anywhere from 20 to 50 pounds, containing rations, ammunition, bandages, tools, clothing, and miscellaneous personal items in addition to their weapons. Sailors, once deployed, spent months at sea operating their assigned vessels. Larger ships, particularly aircraft carriers, were veritable floating cities. In most, sailors lived and worked in cramped conditions, often sleeping in bunks stacked in rooms housing dozens of sailors. Senior officers received small rooms of their own. 60,000 American sailors lost their lives in the war. During World War II, the Air Force was still a branch of the U.S. Army, and soldiers served in ground and air crews. World War II saw the institutionalization of massive bombing campaigns against cities and industrial production. Large bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress required pilots, navigators, bombardiers, radio operators, and 4 dedicated machine gunners.
Whoa.
Airmen on bombing raids left. Yeah, Flying Fortresses were like chonky. Airmen on bombing raids left from bases in England or Italy or from Pacific Islands and endured hours of flight before approaching enemy territory. At high altitude and without pressurized cabins, crews used oxygen tanks to breathe an onboard temperature plunging. Once in enemy airspace, crews confronted enemy fighters and anti-aircraft flak from the ground. While fighter pilots flew as escorts, the Air Corps suffered heavy casualties. Tens of thousands of airmen lost their life. On the ground, conditions varied. Soldiers in Europe endured freezing winters, impenetrable French hedgerows, Italian mountain ranges, and dense forests. Germans fought with a Western mentality familiar to America. Soldiers in the Pacific endured heat and humidity, monsoons, jungle, and tropical diseases, and they confronted an unfamiliar foe. Americans, for instance, can understand surrender as prudent. Many Japanese soldiers saw it as cowardice. When Americans saw it as a fanatical waste of life, the Japanese saw it as brave and honorable. Atrocities flourished in the Pacific at levels unmatched in Europe.
Whack.
Nick, you should scroll down on the notes.
Oh, I'm on yours. Whoops, I've been switching between notes just for the fun of it.
Do like half and half on the top.
It just doesn't look nice if I do that, is the thing.
Yeah. I guess.
Right.
I mean,
There we go. I'm doing my notes this time, and then, actually, wait a second, this section's over. Well, whatever, I'll do them for the next section.
Yeah, we finished the section already. Go section. Go section.
that section, by the way, wasn't very important. There wasn't any key terms in it.
It really wasn't. I don't know why. Like we just like.
Yeah, that was, like, kinda wacky. Okay,
just
whatever.
Like, yeah,
Anyway.
stuff happened. Alright, wartime economy. Yasha, you're up, I think, right? We're switching off.
VII. The wartime economy. Economies win wars no less than militaries. Ooh, no shit.
I breathe.
Wartime production.
I agree.
Reawakened Americans' economic might, armed allied belligerents, and the American armed forces effectively fooled America out of the Great Depression and ushered in an era of unparalleled economic prosperity.
This is kind of like the Inkfish that Max was talking about in
Which is like, see it in your textbooks.
Yes,
Yeah.
look into the yop.
Had ameliorated the worst of the depression.
Literally, that entire
economy
first paragraph
is
is just
its
war
way
brought
forward
prosperity.
in the 1940s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then Europe fell into war, and despite its isolationism, Americans were glad to sell the Allies arms and supplies, aka Switzerland. And then Pearl Harbor changed everything. And then the Fire Nation attacked.
No.
And then the what happened?
The Fire Nation attacked Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Oh god.
The United States drafted the economy into war service. The sleeping giant mobilized its unrivaled economic capacity to wage worldwide war. We're
See,
so
I don't know
cool,
about
you
you
guys.
guys,
Our
but it kinda
country's
sounds
so
strong.
cool.
That kind of
We're
sounds
the
like
best.
propaganda. Yeah, we're the.
It's just like saying how cool we are. We are so cool. We made money and then we kicked
We
some
used
ass.
it. Wow.
We sure did.
Maybe.
Governmental entities such as the War Production Board and the Office of War Mobilization and Reconversion managed economic production for the war effort, and the economic output exploded. An economy that was unable to provide work for a quarter of the workforce less than a decade earlier now struggled to fill vacant positions. Government spending during the 4 years of war doubled all federal spending in all of American history up to that point. The budget deficit soared, but just as Depression-era economists had counseled, the government's massive intervention annihilated unemployment and propelled growth. The economy that came out of the war looked nothing like the one that had begun it. Well, they annihilated unemployment.
They sure did.
But the
What was their
wartime
debt at that time, eh?
The Roosevelt administration urged citizens to save their earnings or buy war bonds to prevent inflation. Bond drives were held nationally and headlined by Hollywood celebrities. Such drives were hugely successful.
Wait, you
They
skipped
not
a
only
paragraph.
funded- Did I?
Yeah, you skipped it.
I was like, what happened?
okay. Military production came at the expense of the civilian consumer economy. Appliance and automobile manufacturers converted their plants to produce weapons and vehicles. Consumer choice was foreclosed. Every American received rationing cards, and legally, goods such as gasoline, coffee, meat, cheese, butter, processed food, firewood, and sugar could not be purchased without them. The housing industry was shut down, and the cities became overcrowded. But the wartime economy boomed, and the celebrities were cool. They not only funded much of the war effort, they helped tame inflation as well. So too did tax rates. The federal government raised income taxes and boosted the top marginal tax rate to 94%.
Wait a second.
That means that if you earn $100, the government takes $94.
Holy!
Wait, actually? That's the top marginal tax rate. Okay, that's not like everybody, but yeah, that's crazy.
That's like
so
if
terrible. Wait, that's so
you earn
bad.
$1 million, now you have $40,000.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Damn.
Or 60,000. With the economy booming and 20 million American workers placed into military service, unemployment virtually disappeared. And yet,
Yep, you already said that.
limits remain. Many defense contractors still refuse to hire black workers. Philip
Scroll down on
Randolph.
like the live stream.
Wait, hold up.
What do you mean the live
This
stream?
guy, A. Philip Randolph, key term right there.
What? Okay.
Where is it? A. Philip Randolph, in 1941, threatened to lead a march on Washington in protest, compelling Roosevelt to issue Executive Order Number 8802, the Fair Employment
important.
Practice in Defense Industries Act, which established the
FEPC.
Fair Employment Practices Committee, FEPC, to end racial discrimination in the federal government and the defense industry.
Wait a second. I might just copy that whole thing down.
That's probably
weird.
smart. Yeah,
Yeah,
like, the
I'm just
FEPC
copying
is
that.
pretty
That's
important.
all
Yeah.
very wordy and nice.
Yeah, because you have two terms now.
Paste.
Boop.
Oh, is that another term? Oh yeah, fair. Wow.
Yeah,
they're
FEPC
all in, like,
and-
one
I
paragraph.
love the fact that Yasha knew that even though he's not an APUSH and most did.
I even have it like right in front of me. Sometimes.
Wait, Yasha, you should just like take the APUS exam.
Yeah, you could just do that, you know, like, it's not like, you're allowed
No,
to do
it's too late to. Isn't it too late to sign up for them?
You
No,
might be
I
able
don't
to.
know about
I
that.
don't think it's that. You're probably still able to. Yeah,
I don't know if I'd be ready.
that. I'm sure you would be.
you're probably fine.
A lot of the
Do
kids
like
APUSH
do a
don't
little test prep
know
with like
that.
multiple choice and stuff, and you'd be good.
Okay.
Alright, keep reading.
During the war, more and more African Americans continued to leave the agrarian South for the industrial North. And as more and more men joined the military and more positions went unfilled, women joined the workforce en masse. Other American producers looked outside the United States, southward, to Mexico, to fill its labor force. Between 1942 and 1964, the United States contracted thousands of Mexican nationals to work in American agriculture and railways in the Bracero program. Special word.
Bracero.
Bracero, special term.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, hold on.
Jointly
Dude,
administered
we're
by
learning
the
about.
Department-
We've learned about this so much in Spanish. Oh my god.
the Department of Labor and the
Yeah.
Department
Really?
of
We haven't.
It's like all we focus on in
Binational
Enriquez.
agreement
Yasha, wait.
5 million contracts.
Yasha, you can stop
Yasha-
speaking when we are
Yasha.
speaking, please. Thank you.
We're taking notes here for when you moment to catch up.
Yasha, as a general rule of thumb, when you hear the click-clacking of their keyboards, just don't talk for a sec.
Okay.
That's what I do. You know, just listen to the beautiful click-clacking of the keyboards. Just that. Click-clack, click-clack.
Okay.
That's like ASMR, but keyboarding and more geek-related.
I didn't know you were into that kind of stuff, Daniel.
I am not into ASMR, let that be, like, known to the public, but, you know, listening to some nice, high-quality keyboard tapping, it's not bad, you know? Yes, the high-quality keyboard
Spanish
tapping.
for the Spanish god.
Alright, we're ready.
Okay. Jointly administered by the state. Do you guys get this about the Bracero program?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
go with
With factory work proliferating across the country and agricultural labor experiencing severe labor shortages, the presidents of Mexico and the United States signed an agreement in July 1942 to bring the first group of legally contracted workers to California. They don't say the name of the president of Mexico because they forgot it. Just like
yes, Yasha.
discriminatory policies toward people of Mexican descent prevented Bracero contract in Texas until 1947. Texans are a lot more racist than Californians, is what we learned. The Bracero program survived the war, enshrined in law until the 1960s, when the United States liberalized its immigration laws. Though Bracero suffered exploitative labor conditions, for the men who participated, the program was a mixed blessing. Interviews with ex-Braceros captured the complexity. They would call us pigs. They didn't have to treat us that way. One said of his employers, one other said, "For me, it was a blessing. The United States was a blessing. It is a nation I fell in love with because of the excess work and good pay." After the exodus of Mexican immigrants during the Depression, the program helped reestablish Mexican migration, institutionalized migrant farm work across much of the country, and further planted a Mexican presence in the southern and western United States.
Section complete. Woot woot.
Yeah.
That's one of the things with like the whole like illegal immigration like debate, because it's like honestly it's like, you know, like the work that Mexican immigrants do is like backbreaking terrible work. It's like white people don't want to do it, you know.
Yep. That is.
Are you in favor of that, Yasha?
I don't.
What's like
It's
the
an
people
interesting
who want to,
little thing.
who say the immigrants are ruining our economy. I'd like to see them go and like bend down and be picking cabbages all day in the sun, or go and like, you know, pick oranges all day in Florida. You know what I mean? Like,
Right, but you're not insinuating that that's, you know, an ideal or a necessary situation.
what do you mean? Well, I mean, it is what it is.
You're not insinuating that particular, like, Mexican immigrants in particular are especially useful because, I mean, it may be a
Oh
fact,
gosh.
but
What? Wait, I don't get what you're asking.
Nick.
are you insinuating that Mexican immigrants are more useful working in hard labor jobs that other people would not be willing to work than they would be in other sectors?
Well,
Y'all,
no,
I'm gonna go eat,
They're not more useful. They're not more useful. They just take those jobs. Yeah.
Alright, let me put the stream on
Okay.
yours, Nick.
Just making sure.
Like the purchasing power parity of Mexico is like the dollar is worth more in Mexico than it is in the U.S.
That's true. Yeah.
You know, so even if like for us would be like low pay might be high pay. You know.
All right, you guys ready for me to read the next section?
Yeah, I'm gonna go eat dinner, so y'all have fun.
All right, Nick, we'll be missing you. Wait, actually, like make it set up so like it shows Nick reads notes done.
It's just gonna show Josh Nick's notes.
Yeah, the problem
that
is,
works
as soon
too.
as we type too much, it's just gonna disappear.
I know, you can
Well,
stream
just like
too if
scroll
you
down all
want.
the way down.
Anyway, woo!
Alright. Section 8: Women and World War II. President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his administration had encouraged all able-bodied American women to help the war effort. He considered the role of women in the war critical for American victory,
Go
and the
girl.
public expected
Girl
women to
power.
assume various functions to free men for active military service. While most women opted to remain at home or volunteer with charitable organizations, many went to work or donned a military uniform. World War II brought unprecedented labor opportunities for American women. Oh, that's important. Industrial labor, an occupational sphere dominated by men, shifted in part to women for the duration of wartime mobilization. Women applied for jobs in converted munitions factories. The iconic illustrated image of Rosie the Riveter, that's actually like another like big thing.
It's from Richmond, actually. She's from Richmond.
A muscular woman dressed in
Richmond.
coveralls, with her hair in a kerchief and inscribed with the phrase "We can do it," came to stand for female factory labor during the war. But women also worked in various auxiliary positions for the government. Although such jobs were often traditionally gendered female, over 1 million administrative jobs at the local, state, and national levels were transferred from men to women for the duration of the war.
Pretty incredible.
For women who elected not to work, many volunteer opportunities presented themselves. The American Red Cross, the largest charitable organization in the nation, encouraged women to volunteer with local city chapters. Millions of women organized communities, social events for families, packed and shipped almost 500,000 tons of medical supplies overseas, and prepared 27 million care packages for non-perishable items for America and other allied prisoners of war. The American Red Cross further required all female volunteers to certify as nurses' aides, providing an extra benefit and work opportunities for hospital staffs that suffered severe personnel losses. Other charity organizations, such as church and synagogue affiliates, benevolent associations, and social club auxiliaries, gave women further outlets for volunteer work. Military service was another option for women who wanted to join the war. Over 350,000 women served in several all-female units of the military branches. The Army and Navy Nurse Corps Reserves, the Women Army Auxiliary Corps, and the Navy's women accepted for volunteer emergency service. The Coast Guard Spars, named for the Coast Guard motto "Semper Paratus, always ready," and Marine Corps units gave women the opportunity to serve as either commissioned officers or enlisted members in military bases at home and abroad. That's cool. Commissioned officers meant they could be like lieutenants, like and like stuff like above, like.
Well, second lieutenant, first lieutenant,
yeah, so like,
captain,
they could be like
major, lieutenant colonel, colonel, brigadier general, major general, lieutenant general, general, 5-star general, or ensign, sub-lieutenant, lieutenant, captain.
Okay, Yasha, yeah.
Oh, no, sorry, commander, lieutenant commander.
Yasha. Okay.
Rear admiral, lower half. Rear admiral.
Military.
Okay.
Military nurses worked at base hospitals.
Woman, that's a key term, by the way.
What is?
What?
Women's Army Auxiliary Corps.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, it's like all the stuff I just read.
It's whack. Women's Army Auxiliary Corps.
It is whack. The Nurse Corps Reserves alone commissioned 105,000 Army and Navy nurses recruited by the American Red Cross. Military nurses worked at base hospitals, mobile medical units, and onboard hospital mercy ships. Jim Crow segregation in both the civilian and military sectors remained a problem for black women who wanted to join the war effort. Even after President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802 in 1941, supervisors who hired black women still often relegated them to the most menial tasks on factory floors. Segregation was further upheld in factory lunchrooms, and many black women were forced to work at night to keep them separate from whites. In the military, only the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps and the Nurse Corps Reserves accepted black women for active service, and the Army set a limited quota of 10% of total and strength for black female officers, and enlisted women and segregated black units on active duty. The American Red Cross, meanwhile, recruited only 400 black nurses for the Army and Navy Nurse Corps Reserve. And black Army and Navy nurses worked in segregated military hospitals on bases stateside and overseas. And for all the post-war celebrations of Rosie the Riveter, after the war ended, the men returned, and most women voluntarily left the workforce or lost their jobs. Meanwhile, former military women faced a litany of obstacles in obtaining veterans' benefits during their transition to civilian life. The nation that beckoned the call for assistance to millions of women during the Fourth Year Crisis hardly stood ready to accommodate their post-war needs and demands. All right. Oh, this is like a big section. This is like the last big section.
Of course it is.
You know what? We only have 2 sections left, though. We're almost done. Go team.
Alright, I'm ready.
Hold on.
You ready?
Oh, Nick needs to scroll down on my
Nick, no. See, imagine actually eating dinner. Like, who actually
dinner.
eats dinner?
Okay,
I
Yeah, I
know,
just sit hunched over in my room doing homework and just like eating like a croissant in my hand if I have time, scavenging the remains.
Caffeine. And that's all.
You know what? I don't consume caffeine. I don't drink any caffeine.
Daniel
not
P.S.
It's an utter lie. It is
That's
the largest
probably
lie of the night.
The largest lie of the night. You know, that sounds like a rap song. I don't know what I'm saying. No, I just stepped on my keys. What's that? Sorry, somebody read. I don't know. Where did I put my keys?
Yasha, do you want to read?
Yeah.
Yeah, Yasha, it's your turn.
Race in World War II.
Guys, I lost my keys.
World War time affected nearly every aspect of life in the United States, and America's racial relationships were not immune.
Found him.
African Americans, Mexicans and Mexican Americans, Jews, and Japanese Americans were profoundly impacted. In early 1941, months before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, A. Philip Randolph, president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the largest black trade union in the nation, made headlines by threatening President Roosevelt with a march on Washington, D.C. More stuff on Philip Randolph. In this crisis of democracy, Randolph said, defense industries refused to hire African Americans and the armed forces remained segregated. In exchange for calling off the march, Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8802, banning racial and religious discrimination in defense industries and establishing the FEPC to monitor defense industry hiring practices. While the armed forces remained segregated throughout the war, and the FEPC had limited influence, the order showed that the federal government could stand against discrimination. The black workforce in defense industries rose from 3% in 1942 to 9% in 1945. Wow, 3 times increase. More than 1 million African Americans fought in the war. Most blacks served in segregated, non-combatant units led by white officers. Some gains were made, however. The number of black officers increased from 5 in 1940 to over 7,000 in 1945. Can we just take a second to appreciate that there were 5 black officers in the entire military in 1940? 5!
5. You know, that's... Yeah. Ooh.
To 7,000 in 1945. The all-black pilot squadrons, known as the Tuskegee Airmen, completed more than 1,500 missions, escorted heavy bombers into Germany, and earned several hundred merits and medals. Wow.
Yeah, they're so cool.
Many bomber
They're
crews
so cool.
specifically requested the Red Tail Angels as escorts. and near the end of the war, the Army and Navy began integrating some of their units and facilities, before the U.S. government finally ordered the full integration of its armed forces in 1948.
Wait, hold on. Hyphens. I don't know how to use them. All right. Sick.
All right, we got Estrella down as a guest speaker sometime.
Hell yeah.
Buttigieg Police Department. What? Oh, the 5 black officers. Okay, you guys ready?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yup.
While black Americans served in the armed forces, though they were segregated, on the home front they became riveters and welders, rationed food and gasoline, and bought victory bombs. But many black Americans saw the war as an opportunity not only to serve their country, but to improve it. The Pittsburgh Courier, a leading black newspaper, spearheaded the Double V campaign. It called on African Americans to fight 2 wars: the war against Nazism and fascism abroad, and the war against racial inequality at home. To achieve victory, to achieve real democracy, the Courier encouraged its readers to enlist in the armed forces, volunteer on the home front, and fight against racial segregation and discrimination. During the war, membership in the NAACP jumped 10
Do
from
people know what that
50,000
is?
to 500,000.
And NAACP.
National Association of something colored people.
Oh yeah,
should-
we've talked about that multiple times.
Yeah, that
Like-
was in
like we went over.
last.
That wasn't like we've gone
Chapter
over that
22.
like yeah.
Hold on, let's just review it. I have my notes open. 1 second, I need to find it. And, why can't I find it?
I think I might be allergic to pineapple because it's making me cry whenever I eat it. Like it burns my tongue, but I still love it. You know what?
Oh my god, Daniel. I think you're just delusional half the time.
Yasha, that's not correct. I get sick.
It's probably true.
I'm with Yasha on that one.
Oh, okay.
You guys,
so
you're supposed to be
that
my
was
friends. You
Dubois.
can't like do this to me.
So
Yeah.
NAACP,
Daniel, friends are supposed to call each other out.
you guys,
That's true.
NAACP was Dubois' organization, like for Pan-Africanism.
It's not W, it's double A.
Double A. Sorry. And that was, I think, the party responsible for the Black Star Line.
That was wacky. Like that was the idea that like the African Americans and like the U.S. should be sent back to Africa.
No, that Black Star Line was Garvey, who was inspired.
Yeah, and he was the one that came up with the idea. He was we're gonna send them back back to Africa.
On Wikipedia, it says fate bankruptcy.
Bankruptcy.
Okay, all right, good.
During the war, membership in the NAACP jumped 10 from 50,000 to 500,000. The Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, was formed in 1942 and spearheaded the method of nonviolent direct action to achieve desegregation. Between 1940 and 1950, some 1.5 million Southern blacks, the largest number of any decade since the beginning of the Great Migration, also indirectly demonstrated their opposition to racism and violence by migrating out of the Jim Crow South to the North. The transitions were not easy. Racial tensions erupted in 1943 in a series of riots in cities such as Mobile, Beaumont, and Harlem. The bloodiest race riot occurred in Detroit, and resulted in the death of 25 blacks and 9 whites. Still, the war ignited in African Americans an urgency for equality that they would carry with them to subsequent years.
So this is the second Great Migration, right?
Yes, I believe so. Mm-hmm.
Second Great Migration. Racial tensions. Oh, I'm getting the call.
Hmm.
Oh, we should listen to your really beautiful ringtone. Aw, we're missing the ringtone. Nick Lee has a very beautiful ringtone.
Are you guys ready?
Wait for
Well, I
him to
think
go
Nick,
call.
yeah, I think Nick's like doing. Yeah, he's doing it.
Does he have like black market contacts or something?
No, his mom's probably telling him to do chores.
Remember when he had to get turtles last time? Oh my gosh, the turtles.
It's turtle.
There's tortoises. Yeah, you have to go rescue the tortoises.
It's actually tortai.
Is it really tortai?
You know what they say? A tortoise a day keeps the
Daniel away.
Yeah, keeps the Daniel away. Don't bring no tortoises near me, cause I'll run away.
Switch weights.
No, it's
Switch
turtles. You're wrong.
No, it's turtles. You're wrong. Oh gosh. You know what? We're doing great. Oh my gosh, we're almost done with the chapter. We have like a section and a half left, and the section we have left is like extremely short.
Wait, what is the AP US history test about?
AP US history.
Like, what have you guys been learning?
US history.
But like, from what? Like, about what?
Everything.
US America. Oh, Nick Lee's back. Okay, start reading.
Okay. Many Americans had to navigate American prejudice, and America's entry into the war left foreign nationals from the belligerent nations in a precarious position. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, targeted many on suspicions of disloyalty for detainment, hearings, and possible internment under the Alien Enemy Act. Those who received an order for internment were sent to government camps secured by barbed wire and armed guards.
Oh,
Such internments were supposed to be for a cause. Then, on February 19th, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, Order 66, authorizing the removal of any persons from designated, quote, exclusion zones, which ultimately covered nearly a third of the country, at the discretion of military commanders. 30,000 Japanese Americans fought for the United States in World War II, but wartime anti-Japanese sentiment built on historical prejudices, and under the order, people of Japanese descent, both immigrants and American citizens, were detained and placed under the custody of the War Relocation Authority, the civil agency that supervised the relocation to internment camps. That was a really long sentence.
okay,
I
hold on.
wonder what we're going to talk about in APUSH this week. I bet we're going to talk a whole crap ton a lot about internment camps, because they love talking about all the bad things.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about internment camps. Dude, actually, there's like a whole bunch of. You just lagged out for like 2 minutes. Never mind, you're back. Yeah, we're probably gonna talk about that.
They lost their homes and jobs. Over 10,000 German nationals and a smaller number of Italian nationals were interned at various times in the United States during World War II, but American police disproportionately targeted Japanese-descended population, and individuals did not receive personalized reviews prior to the internment. This policy of mass exclusion and the detention affected over 110,000 Japanese and Japanese-descended individuals. 70,000 were American citizens. In its 1982 report, Personal Justice Denied, the congressionally appointed Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians concluded that the broad historical causes shaping the relocation program were race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. Probably the one biggest mistake that Roosevelt made. Although the exclusion orders were found to have been constitutionally permissible under the Vijaries. What is this English? Vijaries of national security. They were later judged, even by the military and judicial leaders of the to have been a grave injustice against people of Japanese descent. In 1988, President Reagan signed a law that formally apologized for internment and provided reparations to surviving internees.
Yeah, if you're like 100 years old at this point. Here, have some money.
And remember, like, people had their entire businesses taken away from them, you know. Like, you could have, imagine having an entire store that you, in a business you built up your entire life, and that's just gone, you know. Like, you have to start over from zero.
Yeah, because they're forced into camps.
They got like $8,000 or something, I think.
20,000, I think.
How much?
20.
20?
Oh, that's better. Okay.
And then they all went and bought Japanese cars, which was really funny. because like, some new
Did they actually?
some new Japanese car had just come out, and it was $20,000. So
Toyota.
A lot of them went and bought.
When was Toyota?
It was
Are we
Toyota.
we're looking at the history of Toyota for Japan. Okay.
Oh yeah, 1937. Huh.
Yeah, guys, all those companies worked for their respective militaries. Like Germany, like a Volkswagen, and like BMW, like they all made like tanks and stuff. And
yeah, the auto industry is probably the most useful for manufacturing.
Chrysler actually makes our tanks, you know.
Really?
Yeah.
Chrysler
You know, I
tanks?
don't buy it. It's not a
I want
Chrysler.
one
There's
of
no more
those.
Abrams being made anymore, but yeah.
I was gonna say, do we still make tanks?
We have just Abrams. We're just upgrading.
I know we have them, but would we make any more?
I don't think we're making any new ones. So we have like just a few thousand.
Aren't tanks like not super useful anymore just because we can drop bombs from wherever?
Tanks. That's kind of incredibly false, but
Yeah,
That's
that's
kind of
very
incredibly false.
Okay.
Yeah,
countries
um,
all over Europe.
you can't drop a bomb. What
It's just
what kind of
balls. It's just
what?
buttons. Come on.
Oh, I can't. I'll
Just
go
move
into
on.
it later.
Yeah, we can do it in discussion after.
But if actions during war would later prove repugnant, so could inaction. And as the Allies pushed into Germany and Poland, they uncovered the full extent of Hitler's genocidal atrocities.
Ooh.
The Allies liberated massive camp systems set up from the imprisonment, forced labor, and extermination of all those deemed racially, ideologically, or biologically unfit by Nazi Germany. But the Holocaust, the systematic murder of 11 million civilians, including 6 million Jews, had been underway for years. How did America respond? Initially, American officials expressed little official concern for Nazi persecutions.
Ooh.
At the first signs of trouble in the 1930s, the State Department and most U.S. embassies did relatively little to aid European Jews. Roosevelt publicly spoke out against the persecution and even withdrew the U.S. ambassador to Germany after Kristallnacht. He pushed for the 1938 Evian Conference in France, in which international leaders discussed the Jewish refugee problem and worked to expand Jewish immigration quotas by the tens of thousands of people per year. But the conference came to nothing, and the United States turned away countless Jewish refugees who requested asylum in the United States. In 1939, oh yeah, I know this, the German ship St. Louis carried over 900 Jewish refugees. They could not find a country that would take them. The passengers could not receive visas under the U.S. quota system. A State Department wire to one passenger read, all must await their turns on the waiting list and qualify for and obtain immigration visas before they be admissible into the United States. The ship cabled the president for a special privilege, but the president said nothing. The ship was forced to return to Europe. Hundreds of St. Louis's passengers would perish in the Holocaust. Anti-Semitism still permeated the United States. Even if Roosevelt wanted to do more, it's difficult to trace his own thoughts and personal views. He judged the political price for increasing immigration quotas as too high. In 38 and 39, the U.S. Congress debated the I don't know if it's Wagner or Rogers bill. Wagner-Rogers bill, an act to allow 20,000 German Jewish children into the United States. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt endorsed the measure, but the president remained publicly silent. The bill was opposed by roughly two-thirds of the American public and was defeated. Historians speculate that Roosevelt, anxious to protect the New Deal and his rearmament programs, was unwilling to expend political capital and to protect foreign groups that the American public had little interest in protecting. Knowledge of the full extent of the Holocaust was slow in coming. When the war began, American officials, including Roosevelt, doubted initial reports of industrial death camps. But even when they conceded their existence, officials pointed to their generally limited opinions. The most possible response was for the U.S. military was to bomb either the camps or the railroads leading to them. But those options were rejected by military and civilian officials who argued that it would do little to stop the deportations, would distract from the war effort, and would cause casualties among concentration camp prisoners. Yeah, so there's Germany's doing something in these camps. How about we just bomb the camps and kill everyone?
That's a terrible idea.
Whether bombing would have saved lives remains a hotly debated question. Late in the war, Secretary of the Treasury Henry Morgenthau, himself born into a wealthy New York Jewish family, pushed through major changes in American policy. In 1944, he formed the War Refugees Board and became a passionate advocate for Jewish refugees. The WRB saved perhaps 200,000 Jews and 20,000 others. Morgenthau also convinced Roosevelt to issue a public statement condemning the Nazis' persecution. But it was already 1944, and such policies were far too little, far too late. I'm gonna go have dinner.
Goodbye, Yasha. You just finished up your final thing anyways, so we're all good. Alright. We're at the final section.
Hold on. I need to take notes on the refugees board.
Woot woot.
I just copied the whole Holocaust paragraph
Just
because
copied the whole Holocaust
basically there wasn't much you could have done to break it down. I mean, yeah, there is, but I was lazy. I get lazy at the end of chapters, and I'm just like, I'll just copy that.
You know what? At least we're almost done. We're doing great. Nick Brent's eating dinner right now. Oh shoot, I have homework after this. Whatevs.
What homework do you have? Oh yeah, you were
doesn't
talking about
matter.
it. You have a lot.
I always have a lot, Josh. It's all good. You know, it's all fine. I don't sleep. Sleep's for nerds.
Sure.
Alright.
Okie dokie. Section 10. Toward a post-war world. Americans celebrated the end of the war, at home and abroad. The United States looked to create a post-war order that would guarantee global peace and domestic prosperity. Although the alliance of convenience with Stalin's Soviet Union would collapse, sure did, Americans nevertheless looked for the means to ensure post-war stability and economic security for returning veterans. The inability of the League of Nations to stop German, Italian, and Japanese aggressions caused many to question whether any global organization or agreements could ever ensure world peace. This included Franklin Roosevelt, who, as Woodrow Wilson's Undersecretary of the Navy, witnessed the rejection of this idea by both the American people and the Senate. In 1941, Roosevelt believed the post-war security could be maintained by an informal agreement between what he termed the four policemen: the United States, Britain, the Soviet Union, and China, instead of a rejuvenated League of Nations. But others, including Secretary of State Cordell Hull and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, disagreed and convinced Roosevelt to push for a new global organization. As the war ran its course, Roosevelt came around to the idea, and so did the American public. Pollster George Gallup noted a profound change in America. Whoa, that's who they named the Gallup polls after. That's cool. Noted a profound change in American attitudes. The United States had rejected membership in the League of Nations after World War I, and in 1937, only a third of Americans polled supported such an idea. But as war broke out in Europe, half of Americans did. America's entry into the war bolstered support, and by 1945, with the war closing, 81% of Americans favored the idea. Whatever his support, Roosevelt had long shown enthusiasm for the ideas later enshrined in the United Nations (UN) Charter. In January 1941, he announced his four freedoms: freedom of speech, of worship, from want, and from fear, that all of the world's citizens should enjoy. That same year, he signed the Atlantic Charter with Churchill, which reinforced those ideas and added the right of self-determination and promised some sort of post-war economic and political cooperation. Roosevelt first used the term United Nations to describe the Allied powers, not the subsequent post-war organization. But the name stuck. At Tehran in 1943, Roosevelt and Churchill convinced Stalin to send a Soviet delegation to a conference at Dumbarton Oaks outside Washington, D.C. in August 1944, where they agreed on the basic structure of the new organization. It would have a security council, the original four policemen, plus France. Why? France just did nothing the entire war. Okay, whatever. Which would consult on how they just surrendered. Which would consult on how best to keep the peace and when to deploy the military power of the assembled nations. According to one historian, the organization demonstrated an understanding that only the great powers working together could provide real security. But the plan was kind of a hybrid between Roosevelt's policeman idea and a global organization of equal representation. There would also be a General Assembly made up of all nations, an International Court of Justice, and a Council for Economic and Social Matters. Dumbarton Oaks was a mixed success. The Soviets especially expressed concern over how the Security Council would work, but the powers agreed to meet up again in San Francisco between April and June of 1945 for further negotiations. There, on June 26, 1945, 15 nations signed the UN Charter.
Okay,
It's
hold
just
on.
yeah.
Can you
Hold on, yeah.
summarize like that whole thing for me, Daniel?
Sure thing. So Roosevelt originally wanted just to create four, like just have like an agreement between the four most powerful countries in the world: Russia, the United States, China, and Great Britain. That they would be like the four policemen of the world, and they'd like control everything and like make sure there was world order. But then, like all the other countries were like, "Hey, no, we want like representation also. Like, I want some stuff." So, Roosevelt was convinced, and so were the American people. So instead of having just those four countries, they decided to make the UN so that all the countries could be included and everybody would have a fair representation. But it wasn't really a fair representation for everybody because there's still like the top like world powers which had like extra power, and then there's just the General Assembly, which was for the plebeians, just the rest of the countries to just like hung out there. It was like they got access to the club. Oh, to use a Star Wars quote, they had access. Wait. You have a seat on the Jedi Council, but not the rank of Master. Yeah, I butchered that Star Wars quote, but yeah, you get the meaning. Star Wars.
Alright.
Okay. Right, looks good. GI Bill. Right, Daniel, I'm ready.
Oh, hello?
Hello?
Hi. We're
Oh my
ready.
gosh, I got kicked out. Okay, what is the last thing you guys heard?
Well, we heard silence for a while.
I got kicked. I was just I was like explaining everything about the UN for like all this time, and I got kicked out for all that time.
We heard all of that.
We talked about, the last thing we heard was when you talked about how the other countries were just sort of hanging out in the General Assembly.
Did you guys hear my super cool Star Wars analogy?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, we heard that.
Oh, perfect. Okay, you didn't miss much then. All right. Anyway, should I keep reading?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Anticipating victory in World War II, leaders not only looked to the post-war global order, they looked to the fate of returning American servicemen. American politicians and interest groups sought to avoid another economic depression. The economy had tanked after World War I by gradually easing returning veterans back into the civilian economy. The brainchild of William Atherton, the head of the American Legion, the GI Bill won support. That's an important thing. GI Bill won support from progressives and conservatives alike. Passed in 1944, the GI Bill was a multifaceted, multi-billion-dollar entitlement program that rewarded honorably discharged veterans with numerous benefits. Faced with the prospect of over 15 million members of the armed service, including approximately 350,000 women, suddenly returning to civilian life, the GI Bill offered a bevy of inducements to slow their influx into civilian workforce, as well as reward their services with public benefits. The legislation offered a year's worth of unemployment benefits for veterans unable to secure work. About half of American veterans, 8 million, received $4 billion in unemployment benefits over the life of the bill. Wow. The GI Bill also made post-secondary education a reality for many. The Veterans Administration, VA, paid the lion's share of educational expenses, including tuition, fees, supplies, and even stipends for living expenses. The GI Bill sparked a boom in higher education. Enrollments at accredited colleges, universities, and technical and professional schools spiked, rising from 1.5 million in 1940 to 3.6 million in 1960. Wow. DVA dispersed over $14 billion in educational aid in just over a decade. Furthermore, the bill encouraged home ownership. Roughly 40% of Americans owned homes in 1945, but that figure climbed to 60% a decade after the close of the war. Because the bill did away with down payment requirements, veterans could obtain homes for as little as $1. What? For as little as $1 down. Close to 4 million veterans purchased homes through the GI Bill, sparking a construction bonanza that fueled post-war growth. In addition, the VA also helped nearly 200,000 veterans secure farms and offered thousands more guaranteed financing for small businesses.
Wow.
Not all Americans, however, benefit
Hold
equally
on, hold
from the
on.
GI. Sorry.
Sick.
What's
GI
important
Bill's
about the VA?
Well, the VA literally spent like $15+ billion, like giving out. We're not giving out, but like giving money to all these veterans.
Okay.
VA was just the educational. Okay. Veterans Administration.
Yeah, the GI Bill was just
Important.
general. Okay.
So they paid higher. So they provided Social Security benefits, or not Social Security, unemployment benefits. Veterans helped them reintegrate. They gave them. They paid for higher education. They got rid of down payments to promote home ownership. They helped veterans get farms, and they also protected small businesses.
Yep. Alrighty. Not all Americans, however, benefited equally from the GI Bill. Who? Indirectly, since the military limited the number of female personnel, men qualified for the bill's benefits in far higher numbers. Colleges also limited the number of female applicants to guarantee space for male veterans. African Americans, too, faced discriminations. Segregation forced black veterans into overcrowded, historically black colleges that had to turn away close to 20,000 applicants. Wow, that's a lot. Meanwhile, residential segregation limited black home ownership in various neighborhoods, denying black homeowners the equity and investments that would come with home ownership. There were other limits and other disadvantaged groups. Veterans accused of homosexuality, for example, were similarly unable to claim GI. The fights for the GI Bill were significant and long-lasting. It helped sustain the great post-war economic boom, and even if many could not attain it, it nevertheless established the hallmark of American middle-class life. Wow.
Oh, the conclusion.
So the GI Bill led to the middle class. Wow. And we finished. All we have is the conclusion, which I will now promptly read.
We
guys ready?
finished, bro.
Yeah,
just-
conclusion.
Nick Brandt, you made it for the
I'm
conclusion.
just
How was your dinner?
My dinner was lovely.
What did
What
you
did you
have?
eat for dinner?
I had spaghetti and meatball. Wait, not meatballs, but meat sauce, and there was meat in it, so it's not quite meatballs, but you know.
That's the same thing. Spaghetti and meat.
Actually, it wasn't even
Sauce.
spaghetti, it was just pasta. Wow, everything I've said has been a lie. Anyway.
Spaghetti and meat pasta, not spaghetti.
Oh, Nick,
Sauce.
Oh, Nick?
I'm gonna cry.
Why?
I'm getting memories of I lost my poor meatball
What is
I
that?
lost
Oh my gosh.
my poor meatball
on top of
top of
spaghetti. All
Covered
covered
in
with cheese.
cheese.
I lost my poor meatball when somebody sneezed. Alright, let's get Arthur in here.
Yeah, no. We're finishing up the conclusion, and then we can like
Aw.
goof off. All right. Section 11. Conclusion. Fin. The end. Cañez. The United States ended the war in a crippling economic depression. Entered the war in a crippling economic depression and exited at the beginning of an unparalleled economic boom. The war had been won. The United States was stronger than ever, and Americans looked forward to a prosperous future. And yet, new problems loomed. Stalin's Soviet Union and the proliferation of nuclear weapons would disrupt post-war dreams of global harmony. Meanwhile, Americans who had fought a war for global democracy would find that the very democracy eradicated around the world and re-established colonial regimes that had home in segregation and injustice. The war had unleashed powerful forces that had reshaped the United States at home and abroad.
Whack.
Dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun.
Thank you, Daniel. That was very
We
good.
have completed it. We survived.
Wow.
Chapter 24.
Alright.
Complete.
Yay, I missed
Next
half of it.
What?
Do you want? I shared my notes, right?
Yeah, they've been on display the whole time.
They sure have been.
Wow, that's the longest notes I've ever taken for a chapter. Although I did copy a crap.
That's exactly what you said last time, Josh. Last
Well,
time. you
these
did
ones are
exactly
actually longer. Oh,
so.
these ones are 7 pages long. How long? The last ones were 6 pages long, and like just barely 6. These ones are like 7.5. I need to get better at like not taking a crap.
Alright. Well, that was pretty epic. We still have 9
That's
people watching.
pretty epic.
9
Yeah.
people stayed through the entire live stream.
I don't think they actually did. I think lots of people just kind of.
No,
You
actually,
should look at the
No, Amateel's here. Yes, Amateel.
Yeah.
You were there for the beginning.
dude,
and you were here at the end.
Amatil, what a G.
Hell
Amateel,
yeah.
what a G. Amateel, we appreciate you.
Dude, he stayed
Okay,
longer than me.
Amatil.
You guys,
What a
let's
good
have
dude.
let's have a
So-
nice let's have a round of
yeah, I
applause
want to
for
have a
Amateel.
poll. Who actually stayed and took their own notes the whole entire time? I want to see.
Estrella.
Just like yeah,
And maybe
say something. I
Amateel.
know Shreya's here. I think. I know Katya was there for like a decent amount, and she was texting me, and then like so was like a few other people. Like that
There were 4
showed up
people
for a
other
bit.
than us watching, unless Yasha left, and then there's 5, I guess.
There's Yasha left, so there's 5 people other than us watching right now, which is pretty cool.
There's 10 watching now.
Oh, none of them are
Yeah.
named. Amatil's the only one in chat that actually is signed in.
Oh, Alicia says it's background noise, but she's here. Yeah.
Oh, wait, it is
Yeah,
Alicia.
see?
Oh, Estrella was here for pretty much all.
Yeah,
Never mind.
Yay,
Oh, this
Amatil
chat's just being
appreciates
whack.
Amateel, we appreciate you too. And we got Estrella, we got like
Oh,
we got
Estrella.
Alicia, we got all kinds of people. Application.
Oh,
Whoa.
Scholarship stuff.
I don't know if anybody takes notes. Oh, a random question for you guys. Mental notes of the way. Do you guys actually enjoy having the outlines, or would it be better to just show the chapter? I don't know. Cause
Yeah, well, the outlines look cool. I think the outlines are cool. Like,
We could just
personally,
show the chapter and the
Oh my gosh,
outline
Max
that Ambrose
here.
gives
Hi,
us.
Max.
yeah.
Max.
How you doing, Max?
Yo, Max actually took notes on the whole thing. Wait, did
Dang,
did
that's
Amatil
cool.
take
Yeah,
notes on the whole
Max.
thing, or was he just
Amatil,
like
I don't
listening?
he
Should
didn't
we,
say he
should we
did.
publish our notes?
No, because I don't know.
Guys, I'm
Should we publish them?
Uh.
Yeah, here guys, take our notes for free.
Yeah.
I mean, people
no.
can essentially see the whole thing.
Yeah, but if they want to go through retyping it all out, then they can. But just giving other people our notes is kind of
Yeah.
not good.
It's-
I can't read either because I'm blind. Oh, rip.
Aw.
Aw. You know what? I think it's a success.
It is a
It's
So
success.
powerful.
We've got like 5
Good
people.
job, boys.
I wrote
Yeah.
more for this than I
Yo,
did for my
Amatil and
synthesis.
Max both took notes on the whole thing.
You
So that's
wrote
pretty
more
cool.
for this than you said.
Uh-oh.
Oh gosh. No, please no. Oh gosh. Everybody's gonna tune off now.
It's our time to sign
This
off.
is our outro music. No, Josh, why?
No, turn it back on. We need the outro music.
No.
Wait, turn on Motivational Lizard. A second.
Oh god.
No,
Thanks
no,
to
no.
Stein.
We're listening to On Top of Spaghetti.
Alright, I'm definitely just muting Arthur.
Wait, no, nobody can hear.
No.
No.
Wait. do you
There
actually...
we go.
Motivational Lizard
Yeah.
is just like... Okay, whatever.
You should
Alicia, you don't need to apologize for not taking notes.
Alright,
I was just curious, people.
from the bottom
Yeah.
of my heart. Thank you all for listening.
Alright,
Thank you for
folks,
sticking
thank
through the
you.
hours, through thick and thin, through the fun times, through the sad times, through the tears, and through the glory.
Oh my gosh.
This means a lot.
It's been a good run, folks.
We had a good run. We
Tell
tried our
Friends
best.
about APUSH boys. Spread the word.
Spread the word. Don't let
Yeah.
your dreams be dreams.
Spread the
You can
word.
accomplish anything. I
Should-
believe
You're-
in you.
It's
We
in
all
our
believe in
disclaimer
you.
that we're not responsible for your reading check. So, and keep in mind we're not. But we wish you
we just
all
want to
luck.
emphasize that a lot.
We
just
wish you
wanna-
all luck.
This is not actual education material here. It's just for entertainment purposes.
But if you got education from here, then who are we to stop you? Congratulations.
Congrats.
You did something good with your afternoon. You spent 2 hours studying APUSH, and you should be proud of yourself. Congratulations.
Go look in the mirror and say, "Hell yeah! I just listened to APUSH."
Arthur just got kicked.
I love how like cocky Arthur is.
Yeah, Arthur's great.
Glad somebody likes that. Anyway, alright,
Here we go.
bye-bye, y'all. I'm gonna end the stream now.
Alright, thank you guys. Thanks for watching. Tune in next week, Tuesday at 6, approximately Tuesdays at approximately 6 for Chapter 25, which is the Cold War, if I'm not mistaken. Woo woo.
Woo! Okay, bye.
There's no
Woo.
period in between.